Chapter 1987. Next, the swordsman tournament continued. Nie Tian's luck wasn't bad. He didn't encounter any strong opponents in several battles. The few swordsmen that he fought with weren't a threat to him. After Nie Tian ended his battle, he secretly paid attention to the battles of the other swordsmen. The day's battles ended quickly. Other than the few people from before, Nie Tian didn't find anyone else worthy of his attention. The experts that appeared on the stage were already a great threat to Nie Tian. He didn't want any more experts to appear. Nie Tian returned to the courtyard of the city lord residence and pondered about the evil-edged sword duel. Now that the swordsman tournament had been going on for 2 days, Nie Tian had basically paid attention to all the experts that were worth paying attention to. So far, there weren't many people who posed a threat to him, but there were also quite a few. There were a total of 5 people: Xianyuan Yunsong, Windfire, Bing Hong, the Ghost-Faced Warrior, Snow Spirit, and Song Lan. Among the 5, Xianyuan Yunsong and Snow Spirit were relatively less of a threat to Nie Tian. Windfire, Bing Hong, and the Ghost-Faced Warrior posed the greatest threat, and Song Lan was undoubtedly the greatest threat. The swordsman tournament had been going on for 2 days, and Nie Tian still hadn't encountered an opponent that was worthy of him using the 3 forbidden techniques. However, the following battles would definitely be more intense, and he might have to use the 3 forbidden techniques to continue advancing. Nie Tian didn't want to use the 3 forbidden techniques too frequently. He was already too reliant on them, and it wasn't a good thing for him to improve his strength. Although the 3 forbidden techniques didn't have any side effects on him now, who knew if they would become a burden to his martial body after a long time. Nie Tian, do you want to integrate the Heart of Darkness now? Fat Cat suddenly appeared and asked Nie Tian. Yes. Nie Tian nodded and said, the sooner I integrate the Heart of Darkness, the better. I need to improve my strength as soon as possible. The Heart of Darkness is the essence of darkness. If we want to fuse with it, it will be very risky. We must first find a secluded place where we won't be disturbed, said the Fat Cat with a nod. Nie Tian thought for a moment, looked around and murmured, if that's the case, I'll go find the Godly Sword Master and borrow a secluded place from him. Fusing with the Heart of Darkness was not an ordinary cultivation. During this process, one could not be disturbed at all and needed absolute peace. To be safe, Nie Tian wanted to ask Gongsun Xing for help. Nie Tian could have asked Third Lady Gongsun for such a small favor. The reason why he asked Gongsun Xingji was that he wanted to ease their relationship. He still didn't know that Gongsun Xing's attitude towards him had completely changed. Just when Nie Tian was about to go look for Gongsun Xingji, he saw 2 figures appear outside the small courtyard. He raised his head to take a look, and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, because the people who had come were actually Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Kuangsha. The appearance of Guiwu Kuangsha didn't surprise Nie Tian, but Gongsun Xing's sudden arrival made Nie Tian a little surprised. Nie Tian. Gongsun Xing walked over quickly. When he saw Nie Tian, he seemed very amiable, like a kind elder. Lord Godly Sword Master. Nie Tian slightly bowed. The other party was so enthusiastic, so he naturally couldn't be cold. As he spoke, Nie Tian looked at Guiwu Kuangsha, hoping that the latter would give him some hints. Why did Gongsun Xing suddenly appear? Ever since Nie Tian embarrassed Gongsun Xing in the Azura sword field, he hadn't formally met the latter. Now that the latter suddenly appeared, there must be something. Guiwu Kuangsha bitterly smiled. He was only accompanying Gongsun Xing, so he didn't know the latter's purpose in looking for Nie Tian. Little friend Nie Tian, there was a small misunderstanding between the 2 of us before. You won't bear a grudge against I, right? Gongsun Xing took a step forward, sat on the stone table in the small courtyard, and said with a clear smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. How could he not hear that Gongsun Xing clearly wanted to reconcile with him? Junior wouldn't dare. Nie Tian reacted and immediately said with a smile, In the past, Junior has also gone overboard and made things difficult for Lord Godly Sword Master. I hope Senior can be magnanimous enough to forgive me. Gong Sun Xing laughed and gestured for Nie Tian to sit down. He said, "Little friend Nie Tian, what are you saying? You and I don't get to know each other without a fight." Yes, we don't get to know each other without a fight. Guiwu Kuang Sha laughed and quickly said to smooth things over. Nie Tian faintly smiled. It seemed that Gong Sun Xing really wanted to reconcile with him, so he no longer acted polite and directly said, "Lord Godly Sword Master came at the right time. Junior just wanted to pay a visit to Lord." Gong Sun Xing was smart and immediately understood that there was a hidden meaning in Nie Tian's words. He said, "What's the matter?" "There's a small matter that I want to ask Lord Godly Sword Master for help." Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, "Junior wants to find a secluded place that absolutely cannot be disturbed by anyone. I wonder if there's such a place in the City Lord's mansion?" "Of course there is." Gong Sun Xing laughed heartily. Immediately, a strange expression flashed in his eyes. His complexion also changed. He said, "Nie Tian, actually, I came to find you because there's something I want to tell you." "Just as I thought." Nie Tian smiled inwardly. Gong Sun Xing really did want to talk to him about something, but he hid his expression well. He smiled and said, "Lord Godly Sword Master, please speak." Gong Sun Xing nodded and took a deep breath. His expression became more serious as he said, "Nie Tian, I came to find you this time as the Godly Sword Master of the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. I would like to invite you to join the Shunwu Sword Pagoda." As his indifferent voice rang out, both Nie Tian and Ghost Marshal Kuang Sha gawked at the same time. Their expressions instantly changed as they looked at Gong Sun Xingji in astonishment. They didn't expect that Gong Sun Xing came to find Nie Tian for this matter. As the Godly Sword Master of the Shunwu Sword Pagoda, Gong Sun Xing was the supreme existence in the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. He personally invited Nie Tian to join the Shunwu Sword Pagoda, which showed his sincerity and how much he valued Nie Tian. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. Gong Sun Xing's sudden invitation was out of his expectation. "Nie Tian, as long as you join the Shunwu Sword Pagoda, you can directly become the Sky Sword Soul of the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. You can use any cultivation resources in the Shunwu Sword Pagoda at will." Gong Sun Xing saw Nie Tian's reaction and suddenly said, "If you are willing, I can teach you personally. Plus, we are friends, not master and disciple. What do you think?" Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he went blank again. Gong Sun Xing's change of attitude was so fast that Nie Tian couldn't accept it. Not long ago, Gong Sun Xing wanted to kill Nie Tian with his own hands. Now that he was inviting Nie Tian like this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel nervous. "Nie Tian, are you still hesitating after I made such an offer?" Seeing that Nie Tian didn't respond, Gong Sun Xing couldn't help but say, "If you doubt I's sincerity, you can name your own conditions. As long as I can do it, I will agree." Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but smile. Gong Sun Xing wasn't only sincere, but he was also persistent, which made him even more confused. Nie Tian couldn't understand why Gong Sun Xing wanted him to join the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. Chapter 1988. Gong Sun Xing's insistence on inviting him at all costs made Nie Tian cautious. Gong Sun Xing was able to become the sword master and suppress someone like Xian Zongfeng. This was enough to show that he was not someone to be trifled with. Nie Tian didn't believe that Gong Sun Xing was willing to pay such a high price to invite him only because of his talent. Nie Tian had shown his amazing talent a long time ago. It was a bit late for Gong Sun Xing to invite him now. Vaguely, Nie Tian had a guess. Maybe Gong Sun Xing had something to ask of him. "Sword Master, I shouldn't refuse you since you think so highly of me. However, I am not used to being restricted by others. So, let's talk about joining the Shunwu Sword Pagoda later." Nie Tian thought for a moment and said, "I won't restrict you." Gongsun Xing was a bit anxious. He quickly waved his hand and said, "My friend Nie Tian, if you join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, no one will restrict you. You can come and go as you please. Even I will not force you to do anything." Nie Tian frowned. The doubt in his eyes grew heavier. The more Gongsun Xing was like this, the more alert he was. There was no free lunch in this world. Nie Tian knew this better than anyone else. Guiwu Quangsha's expression slowly changed. He originally thought that Gongsun Xing was only interested in Nie Tian's talent and wanted to invite Nie Tian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. However, seeing Gongsun Xing's anxious look, it was not that simple. Guiwu Quangsha and Gongsun Xing had known each other for many years. Gongsun Xing was not an evil person, but he was definitely not a good person either. He must have something to ask of Nie Tian if he gave such a good offer. However, Guiwu Quangsha did not understand. With Gongsun Xing's identity, how could he ask Nie Tian for help? "Sir Divine Sword Master, you and I are both smart people. Some things are better left out in the open." Nie Tian's lips curled into a slight smile. He decided not to hide anything and spoke directly. Gongsun Xing was taken aback at first. He clearly didn't expect Nie Tian to be so direct. Then, he revealed an awkward expression and forced a smile. He coughed twice and said, "Nie Tian, my young friend, I do have a small matter that I need your help with." Nie Tian laughed. He had guessed correctly. Gongsun Xingji, the old fox, had something to ask of him. Gongsun Xingji was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Nie Tian was very curious about what it was that made him beg in such a humble manner. "Lord Divine Sword Master, since it's just a small matter, there's no need to be so polite. Just say it, as long as this junior can help, I will definitely not refuse." Nie Tian smiled and said in a playful tone. He wasn't a fool. How could he not see that what Gongsun Xingji wanted his help with was absolutely not a small matter? However, Nie Tian didn't refuse. Speaking of which, he and Third Lady Gongsun had some friendship. For the sake of Third Lady Gongsun, he couldn't directly refuse Gongsun Xingji. Gongsun Xingji's expression changed again and again. In the end, it became very complicated. There was fear, embarrassment, and some hesitation. "Lord Divine Sword Master, say something." Seeing that Gongsun Xingji didn't speak for a long time, Guiwu Quangsha couldn't help but become anxious and couldn't help but urge. Gongsun Xingji's gaze swept over Nie Tian and Guiwu Quangsha. Finally, he sighed and said, "A few months ago, I broke through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. You all know about this, right?" "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and looked at Gongsun Xingji, waiting for the latter to continue. When Gongsun Xingji came out of seclusion, Nie Tian was present. How could he not know about this matter? If it weren't for the monster Sakura, Gongsun Xingji would most likely be the only legendary swordsman in the 9 realms. Breaking through to the legendary realm was a great thing, but Gongsun Xingji's expression was very awkward. This was very strange. Alas! Gongsun Xingji sighed again and said, "Actually, with my talent, it's impossible to break through to the legendary realm. You are all swordsmen, so you should know that the realm of Sword Dao gets more and more difficult the further you go. The pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one is the limit of my Sword Dao. Before the last seclusion, I also went into seclusion several times. Each time, it would be hundreds or even thousands of years, but the result of the seclusion was always a failure. The last time I went into seclusion, I knew that there was no hope of breaking through to the legendary realm, so I took the risk and chose a path of no return." A path of no return. Nie Tian and Guiwu Quangsha were stunned at the same time. They didn't quite understand what Gongsun Xingji was talking about. Alas! Gongsun Xingji sighed for the 3rd time and said, "In the sword pavilion of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, there is a sword technique left behind by an archaic swordsman. It records a very mysterious sword technique. But unfortunately, the sword technique is only a remnant and not complete. Therefore, this sword technique is regarded as a taboo, and no one is allowed to practice it. You practice this forbidden sword technique in order to break through to the legendary realm? Gui Wuquang Sha couldn't help but let out a strange cry, his face full of shock. Nie Tian's reaction was very calm as he looked at Gongsun Xingji with an indifferent expression. Gongsun Xingji practiced the forbidden sword technique in order to break through to the legendary realm and obtain stronger combat power. This was not strange at all. A swordsman's pursuit of the realm of Sword Dao was originally very strong. But on the path of Sword Dao, apart from the swordsman's own efforts and opportunities, the most important thing was the talent of Sword Dao. Gui Wuquang Sha's talent in Sword Dao was already considered top-notch. He was now at the advanced sword and martial arts as one, but if he wanted to reach the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one, without any fortuitous encounters, he would need at least 100,000 years, or even longer. And if he wanted to break through the pinnacle and advance to the legendary realm, it was almost impossible. It was precisely because of this that many martial artists would often choose to take risks out of desperation in order to reach a higher realm. This was a very common thing among martial artists. Take Nie Tian for example. He practiced 3 great forbidden techniques at the same time, and he was about to fuse with the heart of darkness. Each of these things could be considered as taking risks out of desperation. The difference was that Nie Tian would succeed every time he took risks out of desperation. Other martial artists did not have his strength and luck. Gongsun Xingji took risks out of desperation. On the surface, it seemed that he had succeeded, but looking at his current reaction, it was estimated that he had failed. Moreover, the price of this failure was very high. Otherwise, he would not have come to ask Nie Tian for help. Yes. Gongsun Xingji nodded his head, his eyes flickering with a strange light. He said, I practiced the forbidden sword technique, condensed the forbidden sword intent, and successfully broke through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. But speaking up to this point, his expression suddenly became very ugly. He continued, I originally thought that I had succeeded. But I did not expect that the forbidden sword intent was so terrifying that my martial body could not withstand it at all. Right now I'm constantly being tortured by the forbidden sword intent. Nie Tian and Gui Wuquang Sha were stunned at the same time, and their eyes couldn't help but tremble. Gongsun Xingji had the strength of a peak paramount god. On top of that, he had already reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. His battle prowess was definitely in the top 10 of the 9 major realms. Even with such strength, he could not withstand the forbidden sword intent. How strong was this sword intent? Chapter 1989. Nie Tian stared blankly for a few seconds, then turned to Gongsun Xingji and asked, Is the forbidden sword intent really that powerful? Nie Tian found it hard to believe that some kind of sword intent was so powerful that even a peak paramount god's martial body couldn't withstand it. A peak paramount god's martial body was already close to the legendary immortal body of a saint. If such a martial body couldn't withstand the sword intent, then the sword intent must be so powerful that it would make one's hair stand on end. Gongsun Xingji looked at Nie Tian with a dazed look in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but suddenly lifted his shirt and revealed his exaggerated belly. This is... Nie Tian looked down and saw that Gongsun Xingji's trembling belly was covered with a layer of strange blood-colored runes. It was as if there were countless blood-colored worms wriggling in his belly. It's not just here. Gongsun Xingji suddenly stretched out his arm, which was also covered with blood-colored runes. This is the forbidden sword intent? Nie Tian and Gui Wuquang Sha asked at the same time, their faces filled with shock. Gongsun Xingji nodded at first, then shook his head. This isn't the forbidden sword intent. It's the forbidden blood seal that was left on me by the forbidden sword intent. Nie Tian became cold. He frowned and activated the holographic divine patterns to carefully sense the forbidden blood seal in Gongsun Xingji's body. His expression couldn't help but become complicated. He could sense that the forbidden blood seal contained a terrifying sword intent power, and it was very strange. It was constantly absorbing Gongsun Xingji's sword intent and blood qi. Nie Tian had seen power that could absorb blood qi before. Rui Qianyu's devour power could absorb blood qi. However, it was rare to see a power that could devour sword intent. Especially when it happened to an expert of the sword Dao, it seemed even stranger. After a while, Gongsun Xingji calmed down and said, I originally thought that after I condensed the forbidden sword intent, I had already fused it with my original sword intent. But now I know that the taboo sword intent is constantly devouring my sword intent. The taboo blood seal is formed from the condensation of the taboo sword intent. The forbidden blood seal is in my body. Not only is it devouring my sword intent, but it's also devouring my blood energy. In just a few short months, my body was almost completely filled with the forbidden blood seal. At every moment, my sword intent and blood energy are constantly flowing away. If this continues, I won't live for more than a few months. Upon hearing this, Nie Tian and Gue Wuquang Sha couldn't help but look at each other, before simultaneously sucking in a mouthful of cold air. Gongsun Xingji was a peak paramount god, and as a result, had hundreds of thousands of years of lifespan left. Unfortunately, the forbidden blood seal's ability to absorb blood qi was too terrifying. It had compressed Gongsun Xing's lifespan of hundreds of thousands of years to only a few months. The scariness of the forbidden blood seal also showed how powerful the forbidden sword intent was. It turned out that Gongsun Xing had encountered such a tricky situation. No wonder he had been so friendly to Nie Tian and offered such attractive conditions. But Nie Tian still didn't understand why Gongsun Xing wanted him to join the divine martial sword pagoda. Could it be that Gongsun Xing knew he didn't have long to live, so he wanted someone to succeed him as the divine sword master? This idea popped up in Nie Tian's mind, but he immediately rejected it. Although he was talented in the Tao of the sword, he was too weak. There was no way he could become the divine sword master. Furthermore, Gongsun Xing didn't seem to have any intention of choosing the next divine sword master. That made Nie Tian even more confused. What was Gongsun Xing's real purpose in inviting him to join the divine martial sword pagoda? Exalted divine sword master, Nie Tian said, looking directly at Gongsun Xing. Just tell me what you want, exalted divine sword master. Gongsun Xing was also looking at Nie Tian, but his eyes shone with the light of excitement, as if he were a dying man who had seen his last life-saving straw. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned. He thought to himself, don't tell me he thinks I can save him? Nie Tian, my young friend, please save me. Gongsun Xing's expression suddenly changed. He knelt down on one knee in front of Nie Tian and spoke with a trembling voice. Exalted divine sword master, what are you doing? Get up. Nie Tian was startled and quickly helped Gongsun Xing up. He wasn't used to people kneeling to him, especially when it was a senior in the sword world. Although Nie Tian didn't like Gongsun Xing, he was third Lady Gongsuan's father. He had to at least show some respect. Nie Tian helped Gongsun Xing up and looked at him with confusion. Exalted divine sword master, you're suffering from the forbidden blood seal. I really want to help you, but I'm too weak. Even you can't withstand the forbidden sword intent, so how can I save you? Nie Tian, Gongsun Xing grabbed Nie Tian and suddenly said, you have the God-fiend origin embryo, right? When Nie Tian heard the words, God-fiend origin embryo, his eyes trembled. His expression was clearly saying, how did you know? Gongsun Xing knew what was on Nie Tian's mind and said, I've met people from both the Nie clan and the Qi clan. You once released a sword intent that contained the aura of both the God confinement embryo and the extreme devil embryo. That's why I know you're a god-devil nascent embryo. Nie Tian's expression changed slightly. Only now did he remember that he had used the God-Fiend's sword intent during the sword stone test. Gong Sun Xing had seen through his God-Fiend's sword intent. Gong Sun Xing was indeed a legendary swordsman. Nie Tian had only used the God-Fiend's sword intent once, but he could see through so many things. It wasn't easy. Lord Divine Sword Master, since you already know who I am, please speak your mind. Now that Nie Tian's identity had been exposed, he no longer concealed it. Nie Tian, don't be nervous. I mean you no harm. Whether you're willing to save me or not, I won't reveal your identity, Gong Sun Xing said solemnly. Exalted Divine Sword Master, how can I help you? Nie Tian asked directly, not wanting to waste any more time. Even though Gong Sun Xing had promised that he wouldn't reveal Nie Tian's identity, who knew what he was really thinking? Nie Tian, release the sword intent you used during the sword stone test, Gong Sun Xing said excitedly. After a moment of pondering, Nie Tian unleashed a stream of sword intent from the god-devil sword, which surged into his palm. Quick, use this sword intent to attack me. Gong Sun Xing was very excited to see the God-Fiend's sword intent again. His eyes trembled as he shouted. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. Then, he thought of something. He raised his palm, and the God-Fiend's sword intent in his palm turned into a sword intent blade, whistling out. Pfft! Gong Sun Xing didn't defend himself. The sword intent blade pierced through his body. Chapter 1990. Sizzle. After the sword essence entered Gong Sun Xing's body, it made a strange sound, as if a piece of red-hot steel had been put into cold water. Gong Sun Xing seemed to have sensed something. His body trembled violently. Forbidden blood seeped out of the wound caused by the sword will and circulated in the air, releasing a very strong sword will aura. Nie Tian couldn't help but be taken aback upon seeing this. The sword essence, which was not very strong, had forced the forbidden blood seal out of Gong Sun Xing's body. Ah! Ah! Suddenly Gong Sun Xing laughed crazily. I was right. Your sword essence can really resist the forbidden blood seal. I'm saved. I'm saved. Nie Tian and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned. They looked at each other in shock and speechlessness. Gong Sun Xing was known as the #1 swordsman in the 9 major realms. His current performance did not match his reputation. Divine Sword Master, what's going on? Why can my sword essence force out the forbidden blood seal? After a while, when Gong Sun Xing calmed down, Nie Tian asked in confusion. He could feel that the sword essence had a strong suppressive effect on the forbidden blood seal. Otherwise, it would not have been able to force it out of Gong Sun Xing's body. Nie Tian had a vague feeling that there was a very familiar aura in the forbidden blood seal. He seemed to have felt this aura before, but he could not remember where. I don't know why. Gong Sun Xing calmed down a lot, and he could not hide the excitement on his face. He said, when you took the sword stone test, I could see that your sword essence had a strong suppressive effect on the sword stone runes. Otherwise, with your strength, you would not have been able to leave a 1,000-meter mark on the divine martial sword stone. The sword stone test? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before his eyes lit up. He immediately thought of something and came to a sudden realization. No wonder I felt a familiar aura from the forbidden blood seal. It turns out that the aura of the forbidden blood seal is very similar to that of the rune on the sword stone. The divine martial sword stone was covered in strange runes, and the aura of those runes was extremely similar to the forbidden blood seal. When Nie Tian had first tested the sword stone, he had felt that his sword intent seemed to have caused great damage to the sword stone runes, which was why he was able to leave a 1,000-meter long sword mark on the sword stone. The aura of the forbidden blood seal and the sword stone rune were very similar, so there should be a close connection between the two. Gong Sun Xing knew what Nie Tian was confused about, so he said with a frown, The forbidden sword technique I cultivate is the runes on the divine martial sword stone. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, and the doubt on his face deepened. The runes on the divine martial sword stone were very strange. Not even Fat Cat could recognize them, so how could Gong Sun Xing possibly recognize them? A long time ago, an extraordinary person appeared in the divine martial sword pagoda. He was the one who comprehended the runes on the divine martial sword stone and wrote down the forbidden sword art according to the runes. He was the first person to cultivate the forbidden sword art, but because he couldn't control the forbidden sword intent, he went berserk and self-destructed, Gong Sun Xing explained solemnly when he saw Nye Tian's confusion. I see. Nye Tian nodded. He had already understood everything. The reason why Gong Sun Xing tried so hard to rope in Nye Tian was because he could see that Nye Tian's sword intent could resist the forbidden blood seal. To Gong Sun Xingji, Nye Tian was his last hope. However, there were too many forbidden blood seals in Gong Sun Xing's body. With Nye Tian's current strength, it was impossible for him to force them all out. In order to save Gong Sun Xing, Nye Tian had to awaken more Godfiend power. Only then could he have a stronger Godfiend sword intent. The Godfiend sword intent was formed by combining the Godfiend power with other sword intent. Nye Tian had sufficient sword intent in his body, but he lacked the Godfiend power. Currently, Nye Tian had awakened 256 strands of Godfiend power in his body. That was far from enough. Looks like I need to increase my strength if I want to save Gong Sun Xing, Nye Tian thought with a frown. Nye Tian, you won't just watch me die, will you? Gong Sun Xing could not help but ask as his eyes flickered when he saw Nye Tian's lack of response. Of course not. Nye Tian smiled faintly. Sir Divine Sword Master, I really want to save you, but I'm too weak right now. I need to increase my strength to Overgod first. Increase your strength to Overgod? Gong Sun Xing was stunned. His expression immediately became extremely ugly. Overgod was a bottleneck for any cultivator. Even the most monstrous cultivator would need 100 years to become an Overgod. Gong Sun Xing was already in danger, so he had no time to wait. Don't worry, Sir Divine Sword Master. If nothing goes wrong, I'll be able to become an Overgod by tomorrow morning. Nye Tian obviously knew what Gong Sun Xing was thinking, so he smiled faintly. This. Gong Sun Xing and Gui Wuquang Sha were stunned at the same time. They immediately became speechless. Looking at Nye Tian's reaction, it seemed like becoming an Overgod was a common occurrence to him, something that could be done easily. Sir Divine Sword Master, take me to a safe place now. I can't be disturbed tonight. Nye Tian did not explain too much and just nodded slightly. Gong Sun Xing agreed, before taking Nye Tian and Gui Wuquang Sha to a hidden place in the inner courtyard of the city lord's estate. Nye Tian took a look and immediately remembered that this was where Gong Sun Xing had gone into seclusion. Nye Tian, go in. I and Brother Guiwu will guard you, Gong Sun Xing said as he retreated out of the courtyard with Gui Wuquang Sha. Nye Tian glanced at the two of them, then entered the room. Gong Sun Xing and Gui Wuquang Sha were both experts at the peak of the way of the sword. With the two of them guarding Nye Tian at the same time, it was obviously foolproof and guaranteed that Nye Tian would not be disturbed in any way. Fat, come out. In the room, Nye Tian willed the Hellfire Crucible to appear, with the heart of darkness within it. Nye Tian removed the Hellfire Crucible, exposing the heart of darkness to the space. Immediately, the room was enveloped by a powerful aura of darkness. Nye Tian, are you ready? Fat Cat's figure immediately appeared, looking at Nye Tian with a fiery gaze. Nye Tian nodded, then sat down cross-legged and said, Let's begin. All right. Fat Cat agreed, took a deep breath, and began to move his hands. Glazed energy surged out of his palms, transforming into strange runes that circulated in the air. The entire room was filled with 7-colored light, dazzling and dazzling. A moment later, a spell formation appeared, and the mysterious power of the spell formation slowly surged out, slowly approaching the heart of darkness. "Get ready, we're about to begin," Fat Cat growled. The heart of darkness sensed something, and a black beam of light appeared, shooting towards Nietian. The black beam of light shot directly into Nietian's body, and the endless power of darkness surged into him like a broken dam. Chapter 1991. The Heart of Darkness was one of the three bodies of the Dark Abyss Source Energy. It contained a terrifyingly huge amount of dark energy. This kind of huge energy had an enormous impact on Nietian's body. The instant the dark energy surged into his body, Nietian felt as if an enormous beast had rushed into his body, colliding with his limbs and meridians, nearly tearing his body apart. Even though Nietian had endured a terrifying pain before, at this moment, he was unable to bear the impact of the Heart of Darkness. He couldn't help but scream, "Nietian, you must endure it!" Fat Cat couldn't help revealing a worried expression as he saw Nietian's body distort and his handsome face become hideous and terrifying. He was very sure that Nietian's demonic yuan was enough to fuse with the Heart of Darkness, but he wasn't sure what kind of effect it would have on Nietian after fusing with the Heart of Darkness. Nietian had already fused with the Earth Source Energy before, but the Darkness Source Energy was far more powerful than the Earth Source Energy. Moreover, the Earth Source Energy was relatively gentle and didn't have much of an impact on a martial artist's body. However, the Darkness Source Energy was extremely aggressive and had a strong impact on a martial artist's body. The Origin Energy was originally a terrifying power. There were very few martial artists that could fuse with the Origin Energy, and there had never been anyone that could fuse with two Origin Energy at the same time. In Fat Cat's memories, there had never been anyone that could fuse with two Origin Energy at the same time. If Nietian succeeded in fusing with the Heart of Darkness today, he would become the first person to fuse with two Origin Energy. Nietian endured the enormous pain, but his eyes were still firm, without the slightest hesitation. Outside the small courtyard, Gongsun Sheng and Guiwu Kuang Sha couldn't help but become worried when they heard Nietian's screams. "Brother Guiwu, what is Nietian doing? Why do I feel a terrifying dark aura?" Gongsun Sheng looked at the small courtyard, faintly sensing a dark aura. He couldn't help but ask with trembling eyes. Guiwu Kuang Sha shook his head, not saying anything. No matter what Nietian did, he believed that Nietian would succeed. Gongsun Sheng was extremely anxious because his life was linked to Nietian's. If something happened to Nietian, he wouldn't be able to live either. After a long while, the courtyard finally calmed down. Nietian's screams gradually became softer, but that terrifying dark aura was still there, and it had become even more intense. In the room, Fat Cat looked at Nietian, who had calmed down. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly as she murmured, "Everything is going well. Next, we'll see what will happen after Nietian completely integrates with the Heart of Darkness." The Heart of Darkness constantly released a dark energy that flowed into Nietian's body, where it was absorbed by his demon essence. At this time, Nietian's mana was in a very strange state. It was surging with a violent dark aura, as if it would explode at any time. At the same time, Nietian's aura skyrocketed as he circulated his demon yuan. After who knew how long, Nietian suddenly felt a profound power appear in his body. It was streaks of white light that circulated through his meridians and blood, fusing with his martial body. The power of laws. Fat Cat suddenly sensed something, and her eyes could not help but waver. Afterwards, she became overjoyed. The power of laws had appeared in Nietian's body. This meant that he had successfully broken through to Over God. What powerful power of laws! Fat Cat was shocked when he sensed the presence in Nietian's body. This was the most powerful power of laws he had ever seen. The power of laws was the symbol of an overgod, but this power was normally not used in battle. Instead, it constantly grew stronger as the cultivator's cultivation increased. Once a cultivator reached the peak of Overgod, the Overgod laws would produce the power of the ways, helping the cultivator reach Overgod. Even though the Overgod laws were not used in battle, there were still differences in strength. Usually, the more powerful the Overgod laws were, the greater the cultivator's talent, and the greater their accomplishments in the future. The fat cat had seen countless laws of Overgods before, but it had never seen the laws of a cultivator who had just become an Overgod possess such great power. Nye Tion's talent had exceeded Fat Cat's expectations. At this moment, the heart of darkness was still constantly releasing the power of darkness. It surged into Nye Tion's body madly, causing his presence to grow stronger and stronger. The heart of darkness really is powerful. Fat Cat could not help but cry out when he sensed that Nye Tion's presence was still skyrocketing. Arg! However, right at this moment, Nye Tion suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Immediately after, a terrifying wave of dark aura erupted from his body, directly exploding in all directions. The sudden attack caught Fat Cat off guard. Before he could even react, he was sent flying. Rumble! In the next moment there was a huge explosion, and the entire room directly exploded. The terrifying power of formations and runes appeared in the air, turning into surging waves of air that wreaked havoc in the space. This was the place where Gongsun Xing cultivated in seclusion, and it was surrounded by a powerful sword formation. Even a peak Overgod cultivator would not be able to break through the sword formation. How could Nye Tion's body explode with such terrifying power? He could directly break through the protective sword formation. What's going on? Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Kwangsha, who had been guarding outside, cried out at the same time. Gongsun Xing knew better than anyone how terrifying the protective sword formation was. He could not believe that Nye Tion could so easily break through it. Bang! At this moment, a figure suddenly broke through the broken sword formation and appeared in front of Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Kwangsha. Nye Tion. Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Kwangsha were stunned. The person who appeared in front of them was none other than Nye Tion. But at this moment, Nye Tion's aura was completely different from before. His whole body was surging with a terrifying dark aura, and his silver hair was flying in the air. He looked ruthless and austere, like a wild beast that had gone berserk. What a strong killing intent! Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Kwangsha could feel the extremely bloody killing intent in the space around them. They couldn't help but tremble and exclaim at the same time. Both of them had experienced countless life and death situations, but they had never seen such a terrifying killing intent. At this moment, Nye Tion was like a killing vortex, constantly releasing a strong killing intent, causing the entire space to become silent and austere. What's going on? Gongsun Xing could feel that something was wrong, and his voice couldn't help but tremble. In the past, Nye Tion was also a ruthless person, but he was definitely not a cruel and bloodthirsty person. At this moment, his whole aura was only filled with killing intent, and it was a completely pure killing intent, as if he wanted to kill everyone. This kind of killing intent was too terrifying, and it made people shiver from the bottom of their hearts. Nye Tion is out of control. At this time, Fat Cat's voice sounded, and he looked very flustered. He stared closely at Nye Tion's eyes, and his face was extremely shocked. Chapter 1992. What's going on? Didn't Nye Tion go to increase his strength? Why did he suddenly lose control? Suddenly hearing that Nye Tion had lost control, Gongsun Xing's face suddenly changed, and he said with a trembling voice. Nye Tion's life and death was related to his life and death, so he was naturally very nervous. Don't think so much, stop Nye Tion! Fat Cat shouted, and roared at Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Kwangsha. He also didn't know why Nye Tion suddenly lost control, but the most important thing now was to stop Nye Tion first. Okay. Guiwu Kwangsha replied, and his figure moved. Sword intent gushed out of his whole body, turning into a net of sword intent, and enveloped Nietian. He didn't dare to hurt Nietian, and could only think of a way to control the latter. Roar! Nietian's black eyes flickered, and a beast-like roar came from his throat, and directly punched out. Suddenly, a terrifying black fist shadow whizzed out, and the sword intent net in the air directly collapsed. How is this possible? Guiwu Kwangsha's figure flickered, and avoided the fist shadow, but his face was incomparably shocked. He suddenly discovered that Nietian's strength had soared by several times, and could actually easily break his sword intent. It was really too strange. His strength has increased, you must go all out. Fat Cat saw this, and shouted to remind. At this moment, Fat Cat already felt that the power of gods and demons in Nietian's body had unexpectedly awakened. The origin embryo of gods and demons, the power of 9,000 gods and demons, had all awakened. This was the reason why Nietian's strength had soared. It was precisely because of this that Nietian could easily break the protective sword array. Fat Cat couldn't understand how Nietian could suddenly awaken the power of 9,000 gods and demons. This was too strange. The power of gods and demons had all awakened, and it caused a huge impact on Nietian's divine sense, causing him to directly lose control. Boom! Just at this moment, Nietian suddenly sent a fist rumbling out. Instantly, a fist shadow akin to a mountain came crashing down towards the ghost martial wild sand. What a powerful aura! Guiwu Kwangsha felt a frightening power pressing down on him. His eyes couldn't help but tremble as he cried out in alarm. His reaction was very fast. He directly stabbed out with his sword, and a huge sword shadow appeared, blocking the huge fist shadow in the air. Despite this, Guiwu Kwangsha was still forced to retreat, to the point that he was almost unable to stand. It had only been a casual fist strike, but Nietian had sent the peak paramount god Ghost Warrior Wild Sand tumbling backward. His battle prowess is terrifying, Ghost Warrior Wild Sand said, his eyes trembling. Even more terrifying than a peak paramount god. Thankfully, Ghost Warrior Wild Sands was far stronger than an ordinary peak paramount god. Otherwise, even if Nietian couldn't kill him, he would definitely have been seriously injured. Nietian's combat prowess was too frightening, far exceeding the expectations of the Ghost Martial Wild Sand. Brother Ghost Warrior, stand down. Let me handle this. Gongsun Xingji's voice rang out. He stabbed out with his sword, and a majestic sword shadow appeared, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as it pressed down on Nietian. Instantly, a terrifying sword pressure spread out, and the remaining talismans in the sword formation around Nietian were directly shattered. Even the ground beneath his feet was cracked. Gongsun Xingji was worthy of being called the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms. His sword strike was several times more powerful than Guiwu Kwangsha's. More importantly, his control of sword will had reached the acme of perfection. Although this sword strike looked terrifying, it wouldn't cause too much damage to Nietian. Its main purpose was to keep Nietian under control. Nietian felt the enormous sword pressure coming from above his head. He suddenly raised his head, and a hideous look appeared in his eyes. Then, he punched out. His fist was extremely powerful, and the shadow of his fist soared into the sky, crashing against the protective sword formation. Fortunately, there was a huge protective sword formation here. Otherwise, everything within tens of thousands of meters would have been destroyed in an instant. Rumble! The enormous sword shadow fell from the sky like a waterfall, swallowing the fist shadow in an instant. Then, it turned into a boundless pressure that came crashing down. Bang! In the blink of an eye, Nietian erupted with a terrifying sword aura. He looked like a giant, standing up to the sky and resisting the boundless pressure in the air. A huge shockwave that could be seen with the naked eye spread out in the sky, violently bombarding the guardian sword formation in the surroundings, causing the entire formation to shake. When the divine martial sword pagoda was first established, countless powerful swordsmen had poured a great deal of effort into it, and it could withstand the attacks of peak paramount gods. But now, as Nie Tian and Gongsun Xingji fought, the sword formation was under a severe test. How is this possible? How could Nie Tian become so strong in the blink of an eye? Gongsun Xingji's eyes were trembling. He could actually sense that there was an extremely violent and terrifying power surging inside of Nie Tian. He had never encountered such a terrifying power before, and it struck fear into his heart. Crap! At this time, little Fat Cat, who had been observing from the side, suddenly let out a loud cry of shock. He suddenly realized that Nie Tian was emanating blood energy. The power of 9,000 gods and devils was awakening at the same time, and Nie Tian's body couldn't handle it. His blood energy was leaking out of control. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nie Tian ran out of blood energy and died. Fat old man, you must control Nie Tian. Little Fat Cat realized this, and its face changed as it shouted in fear. The fat old man he was referring to was none other than Gongsun Xingji. Gongsun Xingji roared, and his sword will surged out like a broken dam, transforming into boundless sword pressure that bore down on Nie Tian. This time, Gongsun Xingji's sword pressure was many times stronger than before. Even a peak paramount god wouldn't be able to come out of it unscathed. Boom! All of a sudden, the ground under Nie Tian's feet sank, and the ground in a radius of tens of meters cracked and crumbled, raising a layer of soil. Roar! However, right at this moment, Nie Tian let out another furious roar. His abyss-like black pupils actually faintly emitted a dark red color, as if he was a wild beast that had been completely enraged. In the next moment, Nie Tian's blood aura burst forth even more violently. Instantly, the sword aura around him surged madly, soaring into the sky like a gigantic sword that could split the heavens. Suddenly, Gongsun Xingji sensed something, and his eyes trembled. Not good! Bang! Even as the words left his mouth, the sword image in the air couldn't be maintained any longer, and shattered. Gongsun Xingji was hit by the impact, and couldn't help but stagger back a few hundred meters. He wasn't injured, but his face was filled with shock. He never imagined that Nie Tian would be able to break through his suppression. Just now, Gongsun Xing had already gained the upper hand. The fact that Nie Tian had been able to break through the sword pressure under such circumstances proved that his battle prowess was beyond imagination. Chapter 1993. Watch out! Seeing Nie Tian's figure soaring into the sky, Guiwu Kuang-sha couldn't help but cry out. He saw that Nie Tian was charging towards Gongsun Xingji. Gongsun Xingji reacted instantly. His eyes trembled, but he didn't dare to use his full strength. A long sword appeared in his hand and he slashed through the air. Endless sword will turned into a spherical shield, protecting him in the middle. At this time, Nie Tian's figure flew over, his whole body surging with a terrible dark aura. He was like a demon from hell, desperately attacking Gongsun Xingji. At this moment, he had completely lost control of his mind, and only the desire to kill was controlling him. Bang! 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 Endless roars sounded. Nie Tian seemed to have gone mad, and he kept attacking Gongsun Xingji. Even though Gongsun Xingji had the protection of the sword will shield, he was gradually feeling the pressure from these terrible attacks. At this time, Fat Cat was extremely anxious. Of course, he wasn't worried about whether Gongsun Xingji could resist Nie Tian's attacks, but he was worried that Nie Tian wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. Nie Tian was so powerful that even a peak expert like Gongsun Xingji couldn't control him. On one hand, it was because he had awakened the power of 9,000 demons, and on the other hand, it was because he was constantly burning his blood qi. Blood qi represented a warrior's life force. Once it was burned out, the warrior would die completely. Nie Tian's blood qi was very vigorous, but it couldn't withstand this kind of endless burning. Fortunately, he had the earth source energy and the source of the earth vein in his body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long. What should I do? What should I do? I must find a way to make Nye Tian become cold. Fat Cat shouted in his heart, but he really couldn't do anything now. According to Nye Tian's current battle strength, it would probably take a saint to easily control him. Unfortunately, there were no sages in the 9 major domains. Nye Tian's blood qi is unceasingly decreasing, and his life aura is starting to weaken. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha had also sensed something, and shouted loudly in alarm. "Damn it!" Fat Cat cursed. Then, she hardened her heart and shouted, "Fat old man, don't hold back. Go all out." Gong Sun Xing was afraid of hurting Nye Tian, so he had been holding back. He only defended and did not attack, but this only made Nye Tian more and more crazy. Their only chance now was to let Gong Sun Xing attack with all his might, hoping that he could subdue Nye Tian. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Gong Sun Xingji was stunned. Then he saw Nye Tian's ferocious and terrifying face. He made up his mind, and all the sword will in his body surged. Suddenly, the mighty sword will spread out like a flood, directly pushing Nye Tian back a few steps. However, Nye Tian was in a berserk state. With a furious roar, he charged forward once more. "Nye Tian, I'm sorry." Gong Sun Xing's eyes darkened, and he no longer held back. He swung his sword, and immediately, a 10,000-meter-long blur appeared in the air. It was like a terrifying bolt of lightning, illuminating the night sky. This! Ghost Marshal Quang Sha could not help but shudder when he saw this. He was extremely shocked. He could obviously sense just how terrifying Gong Sun Xing's attack was. Gong Sun Xing was a legendary swordsman. Coupled with his cultivation as a peak-over god, his full-powered attack was enough to destroy a mountain range. If the attack landed on Ghost Marshal Quang Sha, he would definitely be heavily injured even if he did not die. Right now, Nye Tian only possessed the strength of an early overgod. Would he still be able to survive if the attack landed on him? However, in the next moment, Gong Sun Xing was completely stunned by the scene that unfolded before him. Roar! Nye Tian showed no fear in the face of Gong Sun Xing's full-powered attack. Instead, he let out a wild roar, and a vast draconic aura surged out of his body. It fused with the dark aura around him and condensed into a 1,000-meter-long black dragon. Roar! The black dragon surged into the sky, and an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. In that instant, the sky changed color and the world trembled. A dragon and a sword wreaked havoc in the night sky, causing it to seem desolate and desolate. Rumble! In the next moment, the black dragon and the blur of the sword finally collided. Time and space suddenly froze, as if time had stopped. The feeling of time and space stopping only lasted for an instant before a terrifying wave of air exploded. Immediately, the draconic aura and sword intent intertwined, clashing, devouring, and penetrating each other. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha felt the terrifying wave of air sweep over, and he was actually forced back several thousand meters. He was a peak-over god, yet he was actually unable to endure the wave of air. It was obvious just how powerful the clash between Nye Tian and Gong Sun Xing was. After a long while, the wave of air gradually dispersed, and 2 figures appeared. They were Nye Tian and Gong Sun Xing. When Guiwu Quang Sha was able to clearly see the figures of the 2 people, the shock and astonishment within his heart reached its peak. Gong Sun Xing stood in midair, his body trembling uncontrollably. Blood trickled down the corner of his mouth, and his face was as pale as a sheet of white paper. He was like a withered leaf in a gale, about to fall at any moment. On the other hand, Nye Tian's face was vicious, and his eyes were vicious. He stared at Gong Sun Xing like a god of death. T lost? Ghost Marshal Quang Sha was stunned for a few seconds before he responded. He said blankly. Without a doubt, Gong Sun Xing had lost this head-on clash, and he had lost very miserably. Gong Sun Xing, the master of the divine martial sword pagoda and the greatest swordsman of the 9 major regions, had actually lost. Moreover, he had lost to Nie Tian, who had just become an overgod. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha was unable to accept this. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he definitely would not have believed it. The outcome before him had completely surpassed his understanding of the martial way. Just what power was hidden within Nie Tian's body that could actually allow him to defeat a peak expert like Gongsun Xing as an early overgod? At this moment, Fat Cat was also completely stunned. Nie Tian's strength had exceeded his imagination. He could tell that Nie Tian had only fused the power of 9,000 demons and gods with the power of the dragon qi in his body, and that was enough to heavily injure Gongsun Xing. Fortunately, Nie Tian was currently unconscious. If he had used the sword intent of the demons and gods, he would definitely have killed Gongsun Xing instantly. Fat Cat's eyes trembled. Apart from shock, there was even more panic on his face. Gongsun Xing had been defeated by Nie Tian. Who could stop Nie Tian now? Ghost Marshal Quang Sha? That was impossible. Roar! At that moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar like a wild beast and blurred into motion, morphing into a fierce sword shadow that shot towards Gongsun Xing. Not good! Seeing this scene, little Fat Cat's expression changed and it cried out in shock. Gongsun Xing had already been heavily injured by Nie Tian. If he took another direct attack from Nie Tian, he would definitely die. Gongsun Xing was the master of the divine sword and the greatest swordsman of the 9 major regions. It would be too ridiculous if he were to die by Nie Tian's hands. Nie Tian, stop! At this critical moment, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in the night sky. Cher! Fat Cat had only heard the voice. He had not seen the figure, but he already knew the identity of the newcomer. It was Cher. After confirming that it was Cher, Fat Cat's eyes flickered with a strange light. Chapter 1994. In the night sky, Nie Tian's figure was murderous, like a sharp blade of the night, striking towards Gongsun Xing. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly heard a special voice. His chaotic divine sense suddenly trembled, and actually became clear for a moment. His figure also paused for a moment, his eyes became empty, and his expression was incomparably painful. Nie Tian, it's really you. Immediately, a black-clothed figure appeared, standing in mid-air. It was Cher. Cher saw Nie Tian, and first spoke with surprise, but when she clearly saw Nie Tian's expression, her whole body couldn't help but tremble. She had never seen a person with such an expression of pain. Nie Tian stood dumbfounded, and the violent aura around his body slowly dissipated. How is this possible? The sudden scene caused Fat Cat to be stunned. He knew that Cher was extremely likely to make Nie Tian become cold, but he didn't expect it to be so easy. It seemed that Cher had only just stood there, and Nie Tian instantly calmed down. What's wrong with him? Cher hadn't figured out the situation, and suddenly noticed Fat Cat and asked cold. You, quickly talk to him. Fat Cat reacted, and was extremely excited, afraid that Nie Tian would become violent again, and hurriedly said, Say what? I don't know him. Cher was stunned for a moment and replied cold. Fat Cat was also stunned for a moment, and didn't know how to answer Cher. However, he had already discovered that after Cher's appearance, it seemed to have aroused a mysterious power in Nie Tian's body, and it was this power that made the originally violent Nie Tian calm down. Gongsun Xing and Guiwu Quang Sha looked at the scene in front of them, and their expressions couldn't help but tremble. In order to control Nie Tian, the two of them almost lost their lives. However, as soon as Cher appeared and said a few words, Nie Tian became cold. This was too strange. The two of them recalled that Nie Tian had spoken to Cher during the swordsman tournament. It seemed that the two of them really knew each other. When Fat Cat saw that Nie Tian became cold, he was no longer in a hurry. He tried to sense the change in Nie Tian's aura, and could clearly feel that mysterious power slowly surging within Nietian's body. It's so strange. Why is there a kind of power in his body that feels so familiar? Cher suddenly said in puzzlement. When Fat Cat heard Cher's words, he couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then, he quickly reacted and said with a mischievous smile, No wonder Nietian can calm down. It's because of the tear of the princess in his body. Cher's words made Fat Cat immediately understand that the mysterious power circulating within Nietian's body was the power of the tear of the princess. The tear of the princess was originally given to Nietian by Cher, so she naturally felt that it was familiar. Fat Cat speculated that the reason why the tear of the princess could take effect at this time was also because of Cher's arrival. Little girl, why are you here? When Fat Cat saw that Nietian's aura was slowly returning to normal, he no longer paid attention to him. Instead, he looked at Cher and asked. This was the Divine Martial City's City Lord residence, and it was also in the inner courtyard. Even if the battle between Nietian and Gongsun Xing was very loud, it didn't alarm many people. Cher's sudden appearance was very strange. I don't know either. It seems like there's a force guiding me here. Cher shook her head. She also didn't know why she suddenly came here. Perhaps it was a feeling in her heart that led her to come here. It seems like the tear of the princess is taking effect. Fat Cat's lips curled into a faint smile as she guessed. Cher's sudden appearance was definitely not without reason. The only explanation was the tear of the princess. Perhaps the tear of the princess wanted to protect Nietian, so it led Cher here. Little cat, what's wrong with Nietian? Cher didn't know what Fat Cat was thinking, but she couldn't help but ask again when she saw that Nietian didn't say anything. Moreover, his eyes were also empty and lifeless. He's fine. He'll be fine soon. Fat Cat could feel that the godfiend aura in Nietian's body was constantly weakening, and he said with a faint smile. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Cher didn't say anything else. Her memory was sealed, and her personality had changed. She was much colder than before, especially when facing strangers. At this moment, she was wearing the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, which didn't match her temperament at all. Why did Nietian want to kill you just now? Then, Cher looked at Gongsun Xingji and asked in puzzlement. She had never seen Gongsun Xingji before, so she didn't know the latter's identity. Gongsun Xingji's complexion improved a little. Hearing Cher's words, he couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, Actually, it's nothing. I was just sparring with Nietian. Sparring? Cher was stunned for a moment. Then, she said in a cold tone, With your strength, you actually sparred with him. Isn't that a bit too much? Gongsun Xingji was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying nothing. Cher was late, so she didn't see the scene where Gongsun Xingji was severely injured by Nietian. If she had seen that scene, she would have known that the one who was being bullied was not Nietian, but Gongsun Xingji. I'm leaving. Cher glanced at Nietian. She didn't want to stay any longer. She said coldly and turned to leave. Shue Cher. Just as Shue took a step forward, Nietian suddenly looked up. His eyes, which were as deep as two abysses, gradually became clear again. Looking at Shue with a confused expression, he asked, What are you doing here? Cher turned around and saw that Nietian's complexion had returned to normal. She couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, she asked, Why can't I be here? At this time, Nietian had completely returned to normal, but he had no memory of what had happened just now. Nietian looked at Fat Cat helplessly, but the latter shook her head and didn't say anything. Fat Cat didn't want Nietian to know what had happened just now, because it would affect his mentality. Nietian was stunned by Cher's question. Then, he frowned and said, Cher, do you really not remember me at all? Cher looked at Nietian. She seemed to be hesitating and wanted to say something. In fact, she wanted to tell Nietian that she had a feeling of déjà vu. But before she could say it, she was interrupted by a sudden voice. "Your Highness, it's time for us to go back." A faint voice sounded, as if it came from hell. Only the voice could be heard, but the person was nowhere to be seen. Hearing this voice, Nie Tion's eyes narrowed slightly. A name appeared in his mind. Earth Leader. The voice that suddenly sounded in the void was not unfamiliar to Nie Tion. It was the voice of Earth Leader, one of the heaven and earth leaders of the nets above snares below. As expected, Cher didn't come to the Evil Peak sword competition alone. The person who accompanied her was Earth Leader. Chapter 1995. Who's there? Come out. Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha growled at the same time when they heard a voice suddenly ring out. They were extremely cautious, as they had not discovered the existence of anyone in the air. Earth Kwang's concealment was very impressive, allowing him to escape the senses of Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha perfectly. In reality, probably no one would have discovered Earth Kwang Sha's existence if he had not shown himself. Your Highness, let's go. Earth Kwang Sha did not seem to be willing to show himself. He completely ignored Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha as he spoke to Cher again. Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha both wanted Earth Kwang Sha to stay, but they did not even know where he was, so they could only watch on anxiously. Sir Earth Kwang Sha, since you're already here, why don't you show yourself? Nie Tion's voice rang out at this moment. He said rather playfully. He knew long ago that there was an important figure from the inescapable net following Cher, and he wanted to meet him very much. Now that he heard Earth Kwang Sha's voice, he obviously did not want to let him go just like that. Nie Tion wanted to know why the inescapable net had allowed Cher to participate in the Evil Peak sword competition. More importantly, he wanted to know how he could make Cher recover her memories. Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha were both stunned when they heard Nie Tion speak. They had never thought that the latter would actually know Earth Kwang Sha. The space fell silent for a while before Earth Kwang Sha's voice rang out a while later. He said, Nie Tion, you really haven't disappointed me. In less than 2 years, you've actually reached early overgod. You've really surprised me. The last time Nie Tion had seen Earth Kwang Sha was in the god shepherding domain. Back then, Nie Tion was only a lesser god, yet in less than 2 years, he had grown from a lesser god to an overgod. It was no wonder that Earth Kwang Sha would be so surprised with such a terrifying rate of advancement. Sir Earth Kwang, I don't need you to remind me about my strength. Since you're already here, please show yourself. Nie Tion smiled faintly. He secretly activated the holographic divine glyphs and carefully sensed Earth Kwang Sha's presence. Nie Tion, I know what you're thinking. Earth Kwang Sha's voice rang out once more. Earth Chief's voice sounded again. You don't have to worry. I'll come find you after the Evil Peak sword competition is over about the princess. Right now, you should focus on the Evil Edge sword discourse. As the cold voice faded, the void returned to silence. There was not the slightest movement. I'm leaving, Snow said, then turned around and left. Nie Tion didn't stop her. He could only watch helplessly as her figure gradually disappeared into the distance. Nie Tion couldn't hide his disappointment that he hadn't been able to force Earth Chief out. Tion. Tion, Nie and Nie Tion is Tion time. Tion, time, Tion, are out. I'm fine. Nie Tion smiled faintly. He had no recollection of his sudden loss of control, but he could tell from Fat Cat's expression that something must have happened when he was merging with the heart of darkness. Fatty, what happened? Nie Tion swept his gaze across the messy courtyard and asked with a frown. It's nothing. It's just a small accident. It's good that you're fine. The Fat Cat chuckled. Soon after, her body moved and she returned to the Yuan fetus space. Nie Tion. At this time, Gongsun Xingji and Gui Wuquang Sha had also arrived at Nie Tion's side. Seeing that the latter had already returned to normal, they were extremely happy. Nie Tian saw that the two were in a sorry state, especially Gongsun Xingji, who seemed to be heavily injured. He couldn't help but ask, "Divine Sword Master, who injured you?" He was very curious. Just who was so powerful that they could seriously injure Gongsun Xingji? Ahem, that I'm fine. Gongsun Xingji coughed twice and said with a bitter smile. How could Nie Tian know that the person who injured Gongsun Xingji was none other than himself? Nie Tian, who was that person just now? Guiwu Guangsha looked at Nie Tian and couldn't help but ask. That person's aura is very special. He was actually able to completely conceal himself in front of me. His strength is definitely not below mine. Gongsun Xingji followed up, unable to conceal the surprise in his eyes. Nie Tian didn't hide anything and said in a deep voice, "He is the Earth Chief of the nets and nets above." Earth Chief. Hearing Nie Tian's words, Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned at the same time and cried out. In fact, the two had already vaguely guessed it when they heard how Nie Tian addressed that person. But when they heard it from Nie Tian's own mouth, they still felt shocked. Why would someone from the nets and nets above appear here? Gongsun Xingji calmed down slightly and said with a surprised expression. From his point of view, the evil-edged sword competition this time was getting stranger and stranger. First, it was the Xianyuan family that had been hidden from the world for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, it was the swordsmen of the Holy Parliament. Now, even the nets and nets above had appeared. Gongsun Xingji truly felt that it was inconceivable. These powers might have never appeared in the evil-edged sword competition in the past. I'm afraid that the nets and nets above aren't here for the evil-edged sword competition, but for me. Nie Tian bitterly smiled and didn't say these words out loud. As far as I know, the Earth Chief is the supreme existence of the nets and nets above. But he addressed that black-clothed woman as Her Highness, and his tone was very respectful. I'm very curious, who is that black-clothed woman? And what is her status in the nets and nets above? Guiwu Guangsha frowned and voiced out the doubts in his heart. Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, "That girl is called Cher and she's a friend of mine. But I'm not sure what relationship she has with the nets and nets above." Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha glanced at each other and nodded at the same time. The two of them were not idiot. They could obviously tell that the relationship between Nie Tian and Cher was clearly not as simple as just friends. However, since Nie Tian was unwilling to say more, they naturally could not force him. "Sir Divine Sword Master, Sir Guiwu, let's stop here for today. My strength has only just risen to Overgod, so I need some time to familiarize myself with it. I'll be taking my leave first." Nie Tian was concerned about his current strength, so he did not stay any longer. He directly left after saying that. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha watched as Nie Tian disappeared. Their expressions were extremely complicated. What happened tonight had a great impact on them. Even now, they still felt like they were in a dream. When Nie Tian lost control, the power that erupted from his body was just too terrifying. It was unimaginable and unbelievable. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha's evaluation of Nie Tian had always been very high, but now they knew that Nie Tian's terror had far exceeded their expectations. Chapter 1996. Within a room in the courtyard of the city lord's estate. "I've finally become an overgod," Nie Tian murmured, unable to contain his excitement. After fusing with the heart of darkness, he had finally become an overgod. Naturally, he was overjoyed. Early overgods and peak high gods seemed like they were only separated by a single minor level, but the difference between them was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Overgods produced overgod laws within their bodies. Although this power wasn't particularly impressive in battle, it was a huge improvement to a cultivator's martial body. It was a qualitative leap for a cultivator. Becoming an overgod was even more significant for Nie Tian. His current battle prowess was countless times greater than before. After becoming an overgod, Nye Tian's various abilities had experienced a qualitative improvement. The 9 Extremities War God art had originally been stuck at the 6th Division, the Extreme Wind Firmament realm. Now it had risen to the 7th, the Extreme Lightning Violet Sky realm. Although it was only a single level of improvement, Nye Tian's defense and offense had skyrocketed several times over. Another important factor was that Nye Tian's origin star stone had opened up to the 8th of the 9 galaxies. He had awakened the power of 800 billion stars. Not only did the awakening of the power of the stars strengthen Nye Tian's martial body, but it also greatly increased the abilities he had obtained from the origin star stone. However, to Nye Tian's dismay, there was nothing else in the 8th galaxy apart from the power of the stars. When the previous 7 galaxies had opened, a heaven-defying ability had appeared, but there was nothing in the 8th galaxy. Nye Tian found it strange. However, he had come across a similar situation before. When the 4th galaxy had appeared, the Starry Sky ancient martial art had also appeared. Nye Tian suspected that there must be a close connection between the 8th and 9th starry rivers. Only by opening the 9th starry river would he be able to gain new abilities. Unfortunately, he had no idea how long it would take for him to reach the paramount god level before he could open the 9th planetary river. Nye Tian, do you feel anything strange now? At this time, Little Fat Cat's voice sounded, asking very cautiously. No, Nye Tian shook his head. He was confused. He had no idea why Fat Cat would ask such a question. That's good, Fat Cat snickered. He did not say anything else, but he felt extremely confused inside. He was still wondering why Nye Tian had suddenly awakened 9,000 strands of power. The darkness of the heart of darkness must have impacted the sea of gods and demons, causing the power to awaken instantly, Fat Cat guessed. Nye Tian had completely recovered now. After becoming an overgod, he had awakened 512 strands of power. It was exactly what his martial body could endure. The might of 9,000 gods and devils awakening at the same time was so great that even a powerful expert like Gongsun Xingji couldn't contend against it. Even someone as strong as Gongsun Xingji couldn't stand up to Nye Tian when he became a peak paramount god. If Nye Tian became a peak paramount god, he could unleash the power of 9,000 gods and devils at the same time and crush anyone under the level of a sage. The fiend god nascent embryo truly lived up to its reputation as the #1 ancient taboo. I wonder if I can fight someone like Kanglin's sacred sword now that I have the 3 forbidden arts? Nye Tian muttered to himself, his eyes flashing with a sharp light. He was looking forward to fighting Kanglin's sacred sword. The next day, the swordsman tournament continued. It was the 3rd day of the swordsman tournament, and more than half of the 5,000 participants had been eliminated. There were only 2,000 left. Nye Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gui Wuchan appeared together. However, Jian Jingyun was seriously injured, so he could not participate in the rest of the tournament. Nye Tian was in a good mood. He was looking forward to the next battle, as it would be his first since becoming an overgod. A moment later, the referee's voice rang out. Sword Arena 7. Number 95 versus number 1770. When Nye Tian heard the announcement, his lips curled up into a smile. Blurring into motion, he flew toward the Sword Arena 7 and landed on one of the stone pillars. As soon as Nye Tian took the stage, he attracted a lot of attention. Even Gongsun Xingji and the others in the spectator stands looked over. Gongsun Xingji looked over at Nye Tian in surprise. Nye Tian had expended a lot of blood energy the previous night, but in just one night, he was back to his peak condition. Not long after Nye Tian landed, a black-garbed figure appeared and landed on the stone pillar in front of him. Not bad. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth curled up as he looked at the person in front of him. It was a black-garbed swordsman, an early paramount god with an elementary level of sword and martial arts. At this moment, the swordsman was staring at Nie Tian with a venomous gaze, his body surging with undisguised, strong killing intent. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he saw the other party's attitude. Then, he smiled and said, "Do we have enmity?" The black-garbed swordsman's face darkened and he said, "You brat, you killed my sect's second uncle. Do we have a grudge against each other?" "Sect's second uncle?" Nie Tian couldn't help but laugh. "You've got the wrong person. I don't even know who your sect's second uncle is. Why would I kill him?" It was at this point that a familiar voice rang out from outside the sword arena. "Cut the crap, Liang Fei. Kill him for your master." Upon hearing the voice, Nie Tian turned and saw a familiar face. It was none other than Yang Sun, one of the 3 fierce beasts of the North Sea. As it turned out, Nie Tian's opponent was Liang Fei, who was Yang Sen's apprentice. Needless to say, the sect's second uncle Liang Fei was referring to was none other than Yang Lin, who had been killed by Nie Tian. Back when the 3 fierce beasts of the North Sea had provoked Lien Wui, Nie Tian had killed the second brother, Yang Lin, and the eldest brother, Yang Mu, had been killed by Xian Zongfeng. Only the third brother, Yang Sun, had been spared by Xian Zongfeng. Who could have guessed that Yang Sun would be so daring as to come back and let his apprentice participate in the wretched peak sword discourse? "Yang Sun, do you really think he can kill me?" Nie Tian looked at Yang Sun coldly, his eyes filled with disdain. Yang Sun had seen how strong Nie Tian was, and for him to send Liang Fei to kill Nie Tian would be like sending his apprentice to his death. "Cut the crap. Do you really think you're invincible?" Before Yang Sun could respond, Liang Fei let out a strange shriek, and his sword energy surged even more violently. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said with a cold smile, "I'm not invincible, but I am to you." "Arrogant!" Liang Fei's face grew cold as he let out a bellow. A slender, sharp sword appeared in his hand, and he directly thrust it towards Nie Tian. Instantly, a torrential sword intent surged out like the sea, condensing into a fierce sword shadow in the air, which slashed towards Nie Tian. Astral Soul Shield. Facing Liang Fei's fatal attack, Nie Tian merely smiled. He didn't dodge, nor did he retaliate. Instead, his body trembled as boundless astral energy gushed out from his body. In an instant, a astral soul shield appeared around Nie Tian, enveloping him. Chapter 1997. When Liang Fei saw that Nie Tian was only defending and not attacking, his killing intent surged. Bam! In the next moment, the sword shadow descended from the sky and landed directly on the starlight shield around Nie Tian. However, only a muffled sound was heard. The starlight shield wasn't damaged at all, while the sword shadow was shattered. "This is impossible." Liang Fei was stunned by the scene in front of him. He cried out in shock, his eyes filled with disbelief. He could sense that Nie Tian's defenses weren't very strong, and yet he had managed to block his sword attack without being hurt. It was completely bizarre. The eyes of the surrounding spectators were also shining, and they were quite surprised. They knew that Nie Tian was strong, but the fact that he was protected by a shield of starlight made it seem like it wasn't strong at all. It was very strange that he had been able to block Liang Fei's sword attack. After all, Liang Fei was an early paramount god in the sword, and a single sword strike from him could easily crush mountains. Although Nie Tian's shield wasn't very powerful, it was shockingly strong. How could anyone not be shocked? Furthermore, the power Nie Tian was using was so strange that no one present had ever seen anything like it. "Go on." Nie Tian looked at Liang Fei, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and said provocatively, "Where's your arrogance? If that's all you've got, you won't be able to hurt me." Liang Fei wasn't weak by any means, and he could prove that Nie Tian had gotten stronger. After reaching the Godlord level, Nie Tian's battle prowess had skyrocketed. Even without using his 3 forbidden skills, he could easily deal with an early paramount god. The biggest benefit Nie Tian had gained from becoming an godlord was that his martial body had become even stronger. That said, in his current state, he would still need to use his 3 forbidden skills to kill Liang Fei. "You're too arrogant, you brat!" Liang Fei was already furious, but now that Nie Tian had provoked him, he let out a furious howl and unleashed his sword will, causing intense killing intent to fill the air. "Brat, go to hell!" A malicious voice came out of Liang Fei's throat. Suddenly, a terrifying sword shadow came crashing down towards Nie Tian. Liang Fei had unleashed his most powerful attack, one that could kill an ordinary early paramount god on the spot. He didn't believe that Nie Tian, who was only at the early stage of deity realm, could block his sword. "You want to kill me so badly? Unfortunately, you're not worthy." Faced with Liang Fei's strongest attack, Nie Tian merely smiled cold. His eyes did not show fear, but disdain. "Purple Lightning Battle Armor, activate." Nie Tian's eyes were as calm as still water. He still didn't attack. The starlight shield around his body circulated a layer of purple lightning power. It looked very strange. Bang! The next moment, the sword shadow fell, and a loud muffled sound was heard. The result was the same as last time. The starlight shield was not damaged at all, and the sword shadow directly collapsed. This! Liang Fei's eyes widened in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had used all his strength in that attack, but it still couldn't break through Nie Tian's defense. In other words, even if Nie Tian stood there without moving, he still wouldn't be able to kill Nie Tian. Liang Fei couldn't imagine how an overgod's martial body could be so strong. The surrounding spectators were also shocked. Only now did they realize that Nie Tian's defense was just as strong as his combat power. Nie Tian's strength was beyond everyone's imagination. Trash. At this moment, Yang Sen's voice rang out. He looked at Liang Fei with disgust and roared. Liang Fei's face turned red, and his eyes shone with even more killing intent. "Brat, I'll kill you!" Liang Fei roared. His sword intent surged again, and his blood qi surged. Liang Fei ignited his blood qi and broke through his limit. He had to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tianling sneered and his face turned cold. He said in a deep voice, "You still don't want to give up? Unfortunately, you don't have the chance." With that, Nie Tian's body surged with black inscriptions. One of the 3 forbidden skills, the Dragon Forbidden Talisman, was activated. The moment the talisman was activated, Nie Tian's aura surged. He stabbed out with his sword without hesitation. The sword shadow was extremely sharp. Liang Fei didn't even have time to react. His body was swallowed by the sword shadow, and he died on the spot. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes widen. After a moment of shock, they began to scream. Only now did everyone realize that Nie Tian was just playing with Liang Fei. He didn't show his strength at all. When Nie Tian was done playing, he killed Liang Fei with a casual swing of his sword. Nie Tian's strength had exceeded everyone's expectations. They were shocked and terrified. At this moment, several unfriendly gazes were also staring at Nie Tian. Beneath the ghost mask, a pair of grim eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, cold and vicious. This person was none other than the ghost mask swordsman that Nie Tian had been paying attention to. On the other side, the sacred sword Kanglin was also staring at Nie Tian. The corner of his lips curled into a playful smile. He murmured, "He actually became an overgod in a single night, and he even has the ability to increase his strength in an instant. Interesting." Kanglin had been paying attention to Nie Tian. He didn't feel threatened by Nie Tian's increase in strength. Instead, he felt excited. To a powerful hunter, if the prey was too weak, then it would lose the fun of hunting. After killing Liang Fei with a single sword strike, Nie Tian swept his gaze across the area, only to discover that Yang Sen had long since disappeared. Nie Tian smiled helplessly. He then moved and left the sword field. The scene of Nie Tian killing Liang Fei caused a great commotion. It took a long time for it to calm down. The swordsman tournament continued. The following battles were not worthy of Nie Tion's attention. But not long after, a battle attracted Nie Tion's attention. In the 9th sword field, 2 figures stood on the stone pillars. These 2 figures were people that Nie Tion was familiar with. They were Cher and Xianyuan Yunsong. Nie Tion didn't expect that these 2 would meet in advance. Their battle immediately attracted many people's attention. Gongsun Xingji and the others on the spectators' stand all had their eyes on the 9th sword field. Brother Xianyuan, who do you think has a higher chance of winning this battle? Xian Zongfeng was the first to speak. He looked at Xianyuan Hao Pagoda with a strange gaze. Xianyuan Hao Pagoda was from the Xianyuan clan who came with Xianyuan Yunsong. Xian Zongfeng's attitude towards him was obviously that of watching a good show. I don't know. Xianyuan Hao Pagoda was stunned for a while. He did not comment and only shook his head. Seeing Xianyuan Hao Pagoda's reaction, the others knew that he was afraid. Chapter 1998. The exalted ones, who were watching the battle from high above, were shocked by Gongsun Xingji's words. Xianyuan Haoda's expression was especially ugly. He couldn't help but say, Lord Divine Sword, I admit that the girl named Xueling is terrifyingly strong. To be able to reach the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one at such a young age, she will definitely become a legendary swordsman in the future. But she's only a peak over god, and Yunsong is also a swordsman at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one, so she's even stronger than her. To say that Yunsong can't even take a single strike from Xueling is too much of a compliment. The others nodded, thinking that Xianyuan Haoda's words made sense. They all believed that Xianyuan Yunsong was no match for Xueling, but to say that he couldn't even take a single strike from Cher would be an exaggeration. Gongsun Xingji smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. He already had some understanding of Cher's identity, but of course he wouldn't reveal it. How could someone who was called Her Highness by the inescapable Net's earthen chief be an ordinary person? At the same time, in the 9th sword field, Xianyuan Yunsong had a faint smile on his face as he said loudly, You're a woman, so I'll let you make the first move. You go first. I go first? Cher was taken aback for a moment, then she sneered. If I go first, I'm afraid you won't have a chance. Xianyuan Yunsong's expression darkened, and he looked a little embarrassed. Young lady, you're too arrogant. Cher suddenly looked up, but she didn't say anything. She just said coldly, Make your move. Feeling humiliated, Xianyuan Yunsong's expression turned cold. A long sword appeared in his hand, and he thrust it out without hesitation. Suddenly, a sword shadow shot toward Cher. Xianyuan Yunsong was an early-stage paramount god, at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. On top of that, he had fused the origin power of wind into his body, which made his sword intent far sharper than other swordsmen of the same level. Such a powerful sword strike was enough to kill a mid-stage paramount god in an instant. It's fast, but not powerful enough, Cher said in a cold and indifferent voice. Her silhouette flickered, and she dodged Xianyuan Yunsong's attack. He dodged it. Xianyuan Yunsong's eyes trembled, and he was shocked by this strange scene. He was most proud of his speed, but he didn't expect someone to be able to dodge his sword. It was too scary. It's over. In the next moment, while Xianyuan Yunsong was still in shock, a cold and clear voice resounded in the air. Immediately after, a scarlet sword shadow fell from the sky like a blood-red waterfall, falling towards Xianyuan Yunsong. Xianyuan Yunsong didn't have the slightest time to react, and was sent flying by the sword shadow. After retreating for a few thousand meters, he finally stabilized his body. Thank you for your mercy. Xianyuan Yunsong was stunned for a few seconds, and when he came to his senses, he quickly bowed to Cher and thanked her. He wasn't too stupid. He could tell that Cher was being merciful. If Cher really wanted to kill someone, Xianyuan Yunsong would already be a corpse. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in horror, and they had not yet recovered from the shock. Too many unexpected experts had appeared in the evil-edged sword duel this time, shocking everyone's nerves again and again. Looking at Shui-Er from afar, Nie Tian couldn't help but let out a bitter smile. He thought to himself, Shui-Er's strength is already very strong, and the Netherworld Emperor's sacred garment she's wearing makes her even more formidable. I hope I don't run into her in the next fight. Nie Tian knew very well that the reason Cher was able to dodge Xianyuan Yunsong's sword was because of the Netherworld Emperor Holy Garment. Xianyuan Yunsong's sword was so fast that even a late paramount god might not be able to dodge it. After all, Cher was only a peek-over god. It was impossible for her to dodge Xianyuan Yunsong's sword with her own strength. As the number of people in the swordsman competition decreased, the competition progressed faster and faster. 2 days later, the competition was over, and the top 16 had been decided. The evil-edge sword competition was now in its final phase, the Sword Chief competition. The so-called Sword Chief competition was a battle between the top 16 to fight for the position of Sword Chief. Nie Tian had entered the top 16 without a hitch, and he'd won every single one of his matches. His luck had been pretty good, and he hadn't run into any particularly strong opponents in the swordsman competition. But he knew that the next Sword Chief competition would be the real battle. Swordsmen who could enter the top 16 were all true geniuses of the sword. The Sword Chief competition used a cruel one-on-one elimination system. The winner would advance to the next round, and the loser would be eliminated. Therefore, every battle that followed would be crucial. If one lost, they would have to bid farewell to the Sword Chief competition for good. At this moment, the evil-edge sea was surging with people, and the sky was boiling with noise. Today was the day of the Sword Chief competition, and also the last day of the evil-edge sword competition, because the Sword Chief would be decided today. Everyone was very excited. It was indeed a rare thing to be able to witness such a rare gathering of the sword. Before the Sword Chief competition truly began, many people were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. Sigh. Who do you think will be the champion of the evil-edge sword competition? Do you even need to ask? Of course it's Sacred Sword Kanglin. Sacred Sword Kanglin is a top swordsman from the Holy Parliament. Not to mention that he has a sacred sword in his hand, just his own battle strength is unmatched by other swordsmen. Therefore, the evil-edge sword chief this time will definitely be Sacred Sword Kanglin. That's not necessarily true. The battle strength that Nie Tian has displayed is also very strong. I think he also has a chance of competing for the Sword Chief competition. **T. The reason why Nie Tian is so strong is because the opponents he's faced before were too weak. Think about it, has Nie Tian met a truly strong opponent so far? In my opinion, if he meets an opponent like Sacred Sword Kanglin, he probably won't even be able to withstand one strike. That's right. Although Nie Tian's strength is strange, Sacred Sword Kanglin is a true powerhouse. The difference between their realms is too great. If Nie Tian was given a few thousand years to cultivate, he might be able to fight Sacred Sword Kanglin. But it's impossible for him to fight Kanglin now. The crowd was discussing the biggest contenders for the Sword Chief competition this time. Among them, the two most controversial contenders were Nie Tian and Kanglin. Of these two, one was a famous figure, while the other was a swordsman from the Holy Parliament who could control a sacred sword. Although Nie Tian was in the limelight for the time being, compared to Sacred Sword Kanglin, he was clearly not as popular. Sacred Sword Kanglin's strength was more intuitive and could be clearly seen. On the other hand, Nie Tian's strength was even more strange, but no one was sure exactly how strong he was. This was because until now, Nie Tian had not met a truly strong opponent. Therefore, no one knew how strong he was. This was also the reason why many people were not optimistic about Nie Tian. Chapter 1999. I'll be the first to fight. Nie Tian's eyes glittered when he heard the judge's voice. His first opponent in the top 16 was Zhuo Bufan, which made Nie Tian feel a lot more at ease. The top 16 were all freakishly talented swordsmen, but it was obvious who was stronger. Nie Tian was confident that he could fight anyone head-on, but he didn't want to run into a strong opponent right off the bat. Among the top 16, he didn't want to run into Saint Sword Kanglan, second was Cher, third was Wind Fire Ice, and fourth was the mysterious ghost-masked warrior. Nie Tian had a rough estimate of the fighting prowess of the top 16, and the strongest of them all was Sage Sword Kangbillo. He was a late paramount god, and his cultivation in the Tao of the Sword had reached the advanced level of sword martial unity. Considering that, he wasn't much weaker than Ghost Martial Wild Sand or any of the other experts in the Tao of the Sword. That was why Nie Tian didn't want to run into Saint Sword Kanglan. Without hesitation, Nie Tian leaped up and landed directly on a stone pillar in the sword field. At the same time, Zhuo Bufan's figure also appeared. He stared at Nie Tian with a pair of deep eyes. "We finally meet, Nie Tian," Zhuo Bufan said coldly, his eyes sharp and Nie Tian. Before the Evil Edge Sword discourse, Zhuo Bufan had provoked Nie Tian and considered Nie Tian to be his biggest competitor. Unfortunately, there were too many strong opponents in the Evil Edge Sword discourse, and Nie Tian wasn't the most eye-catching among the top 16. "Zhuo Bufan, this is the battle you've been waiting for. Unfortunately, your Evil Edge Sword discourse will end here." Nie Tian smiled faintly, his expression extremely calm. With his current strength, there was really no need for him to take Zhuo Bufan seriously. "Is that so?" Zhuo Bufan smiled coldly, his mouth curling into a strange smile. A terrifying sword aura rose up from him, and his sword will spread out for thousands of meters, filling the void. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he saw this, and he said in astonishment, "Your sword Tao has broken through to the advanced stage?" Nie Tian clearly remembered that a few days ago, Zhuo Bufan was still at the primary realm of unity of sword and martial arts, and he had just advanced. In just a few days, he was able to make successive breakthroughs in the realm of sword Tao. This was simply impossible. Zhuo Bufan was not an extremely monstrous swordsman. His breakthrough was very strange. "Nie Tian, are you scared?" When Zhuo Bufan saw Nie Tian's surprised reaction, he could not help but sneer and said loudly, "No one can stop me on the path of the Evil Edge Sword duel. If anyone dares to stop me, there is only one outcome: death." As soon as the word "die" fell, Zhuo Bufan's eyes surged with extremely strong killing intent. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded and reminded Nie Tian, "Nie Tian, pay attention to his aura." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he activated the holographic divine pattern. He immediately sensed a very familiar aura in Zhuo Bufan's sword will, the blood-weeping sword infant. The blood-weeping sword infant. Nie Tian felt the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufan's body, which made his expression change instantly. There was no doubt that Zhuo Bufan's successive breakthroughs in Sword Tao were all thanks to the blood-weeping sword infant. "Zhuo Bufan, what did you do?" Nie Tian instantly calmed down and roared in a deep voice. He really didn't expect that Zhuo Bufan would use the blood-weeping sword infant in order to go further on the Evil Edge sword duel. Nie Tian didn't need to think to know the origin of the blood-weeping sword infant. He must have obtained it from Xian Zongfeng. Zhuo Bufan didn't know what the blood-weeping sword infant was at all. He only knew that the blood-weeping sword infant could instantly improve his sword Tao strength. This was too tempting for him, so he didn't hesitate to use the blood-weeping sword infant. "This is my business, it has nothing to do with you," Zhuo Bufan said Nie Tian coldly. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he said, "Nie Tian, you should worry about yourself. Let's see if you can walk out of the sword field alive." As soon as he finished speaking, the aura around Zhuo Bufan's body rose again. His whole body was like a giant sword standing in the void, extremely terrifying. Zhuo Bufan's aura attracted everyone's attention. Many people couldn't help but tremble. This guy called Zhuo Bufan is really powerful. No wonder he's the genius swordsman of the divine martial sword pagoda. He hid his strength so deeply and only revealed it now. His sword Tao realm has reached the advanced realm of sword and martial arts as one. With such strength, he is definitely a strong opponent for Nie Tian. That's great. I thought this battle would definitely be finished with one sword strike. I didn't expect Zhuo Bufan to hide his strength. This battle is going to be interesting. Everyone thought that Zhuo Bufan had used some method to hide his strength before, and now he was just revealing his hidden strength. In fact, this idea was very reasonable. After all, it was too strange and impossible for a swordsman to improve his sword Tao's strength by 2 realms in a few days. Even experts like Gongsun Sheng were inclined to think that Zhuo Bufan had hidden his sword Tao cultivation. Only one person knew the truth, and that was Xian Zongfeng. At this time, Xian Zongfeng was staring at Zhuo Bufan with an extremely gloomy look. He said with a cold heart, Zhuo Bufan, don't let me down. I used an even stronger weeping blood sword nascent soul seed on you, and that seed was originally reserved for Sakura. Xian Zongfeng had specially found a stronger blood weeping sword infant seed for Di Shitian, but later, Di Shitian already had a blood weeping sword infant in his body to save Lian Wui. He did not want to waste the blood weeping sword infant, so he found Zhuo Bufan and used a stronger blood weeping sword infant seed on the latter. Xian Zongfeng knew that because Nie Tian had forced the Evil Peak sword competition to be brought forward, Zhuo Bufan hated Nie Tian very much. He wanted to use Zhuo Bufan to kill Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng felt that with Zhuo Bufan's current strength, even if he could not kill Nie Tian, he could still cause some damage to the latter. Then, Nie Tian was more likely to die in the hands of others. He had long seen that Kanglin's sacred sword and the ghost-faced warrior did not have any good intentions towards Nie Tian. Beside Xian Zongfeng, Gongsun Sheng looked very embarrassed. He was not worried that Nie Tian would lose to Zhuo Bufan, but he was worried that Zhuo Bufan would be killed by Nie Tian if he pushed him too hard. No matter what, Zhuo Bufan was a genius of the divine martial sword pagoda. Of course, Gongsun Sheng did not want him to die. On the sword field, Nie Tian looked at Zhuo Bufan indifferently. He did not want to kill the latter, but he felt that it was a pity. Zhuo Bufan was also a genius in sword principle. If he was destroyed by Xian Zongfeng, it would be really unbearable. Nie Tian, make your move. Zhuo Bufan's aura was like a rainbow, and the sword essence around him surged like a storm. Even the space around him became violent. Zhuo Bufan, it seems that I have to face this battle. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Immediately, his body shook, and terrifying black runes surged out of his body. Chapter 2000. Nie Tian's aura began to skyrocket as he activated the 3 forbidden spells and the forbidden spell runes. The sudden scene caused everyone's eyes to tremble, and they immediately became terrified. My God! Am I seeing things? He's getting stronger. He's really getting stronger. Did he use an energy detonation pill? No, it's not an energy detonation pill. It's the black magical talismans inside of him. Those magical talismans are terrifying. What kind of power is that? How could he suddenly become so strong? He's already a peak over god, and he's still getting stronger. He's an early paramount god. Screams rose and fell, and everyone's eyes were trembling with all their might. They couldn't believe the scene in front of them. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian had risen an entire major level. It was completely bizarre. Zhuo Bufan's eyes flickered with confusion, but he quickly regained his composure. Is this your trump card, Nie Tian? He said coolly. It really is very strong. But do you really think you can beat me like that? Even if you're an early paramount god, your Tao of the sword is only at the level of forgetting yourself. I'm at the advanced level of the sword and martial arts as one. There's a huge gap between us. How are you going to fight me? Although Zhuo Bufan was a bit uneasy about Nie Tian's sudden increase in strength, he was still confident that he could defeat him. As far as Zhuo Bufan was concerned, the gap between the Tao of the sword and the martial path was just as insurmountable. He could easily crush Nie Tian by relying on the difference in their Tao of the sword. Whether I have the strength to fight with you or not, we'll know after you make your move. Nie Tian smiled faintly. His expression was very indifferent, as if he did not take Zhuo Bufan seriously. You're about to die, and you're still so arrogant? Are you looking to die? The calmer Nie Tian was, the angrier Zhuo Bufan became. With a low roar, he stabbed out with the long sword in his hand. Suddenly, a majestic sword intent surged out and condensed into a ferocious giant beast in the air. It opened its bloody mouth and pounced on Nie Tian. Nie Tian gaped. Zhuo Bufan's sword moves were different from those of ordinary swordsmen. His sword will had taken the form of a beast. Very interesting. Sword cutting 8 desolation. Nie Tian slashed out with his sword. Instantly, the shadow of the sword was like a mountain, bursting out with a powerful aura. It turned into a billowing wave of qi that pushed forward. Boom! The two forces collided in the void, causing the surrounding space to suddenly stagnate. Endless power surged out. Nie Tian and Zhuo Bufan retreated hundreds of meters at the same time. They stood in the air and looked at each other, but their expressions were completely different. Zhuo Bufan looked surprised and even a little scared. He didn't expect that the power of Nie Tian's casual sword strike would be so strong that it could easily block his sword strike. Nie Tian, on the other hand, looked calm and indifferent. In terms of sword intent, Zhuo Bufan's sword intent was indeed stronger than Nie Tian's. After all, Zhuo Bufan was a high-level swordsman who had combined sword and martial arts into one, while Nie Tian was just a swordsman who had forgotten himself. The difference in their swordsmanship realm was too great. However, Nie Tian's advantage was that his martial body and strength were far superior to Zhuo Bufan's. Although both of them were early paramount gods, Nie Tian's martial body was far stronger than that of other cultivators of the same level. Therefore, every time he attacked, he unleashed power that far surpassed Zhuo Bufan's. Zhuo Bufan, do you really think you can kill me with only this much power? Nie Tian said with a faint smile, his tone extremely provocative. Nie Tian. Zhuo Bufan's eyes were cold and murderous. Provoked by Nie Tian, he was even angrier. You're courting death, he roared. Zhuo Bufan leaped up into the air and slashed down with his sword. Suddenly, a terrifying sword intent surged out, turning into a fearsome beast that charged toward Nie Tian with bared fangs and brandished claws. The beast was thousands of meters long, and it let out an angry roar as it flew through the air. Its huge body erupted with a powerful pressure that filled the space within 10,000 meters. The surrounding crowd felt the terrible pressure and their faces fell. Zhuo Bufan's strength was beyond their imagination. Die! Zhuo Bufan roared. The beast threw its head back and roared, releasing a bloody and violent aura. The next moment, the beast swooped down and swallowed Nie Tian whole. This! The crowd's faces changed when they saw this. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. It was an unbelievable scene. Nie Tian was actually swallowed by the fierce beast made of sword intent. The beast was filled with extremely violent sword intent. Nie Tian was swallowed by the sword intent, and he would definitely be strangled to death. What happened? Was Nie Tian really killed by Zhuo Bufan? Someone cried out in horror. The shock in his heart was written on his face. Although everyone was shocked, they still saw clearly that Nie Tian had been killed by Zhuo Bufan. Nie Tian, is this all you've got? You can't even withstand a single blow. Ha ha! Zhuo Bufan stared at Nie Tian and suddenly laughed wildly, as if he had gone mad. Nie Tian had been swallowed by the beast he had condensed. He would definitely die. However, Just as Jouabufan was laughing crazily, a voice suddenly rang out. Jouabufan, do you really think you've killed me? A calm voice sounded, and then a shocking scene happened. Howl! The sword-intent fierce beast let out a mournful howl, and then its huge body suddenly shook. A sword shadow actually burst out from within and tore the body of the sword-intent fierce beast apart. A figure walked out from within. It was Nye. The bizarre scene took everyone by surprise, and they all stared at Nye in astonishment. No words could describe their feelings of astonishment. Nye was not dead, and he even broke the beast. This was too terrifying. This is impossible. The person who was the most shocked was, of course, Jouabufan. His eyes were wide open, and he couldn't believe the scene in front of him. Nye could actually walk out of the beast's embrace. The strength of his martial body was incredible. Jouabufan, I've said it before. You can't kill me with only this kind of power. Nye smiled faintly, and then the sword momentum rose all over his body. The sharp and murderous sword intent filled the air, making him look extremely wild. Jouabufan was in great shock at this time, and this was a good opportunity for Nye to make a move. If he made a move at this moment, Jouabufan would definitely be killed by the sword. However, Nye did not do so. He had never intended to kill Jouabufan. Jouabufan was from the divine martial sword pagoda, and he was very talented in swordsmanship. Nye did not want to kill him. I don't believe it. I don't believe you're so strong. Suddenly, Jouabufan looked at Nye and roared like a wild beast. Immediately, sword intent surged out of his body, and he slashed with his sword again. An even more terrifying fierce beast made of sword intent appeared. Its powerful aura blotted out the sky and earth, and a terrible pressure pressed down like stormy waves. Chapter 2001. Ah! At the moment when Nye sword shadow whizzed out, Jouabufan suddenly felt an incomparably powerful sword pressure and couldn't help but scream. He didn't expect that the power of Nye sword would be so terrifying. It had to be said that Nye strength was far beyond Jouabufan's expectations. Jouabufan, the battle between us is over. Immediately, Nye voice rang out, and the sword shadows pressed down like mountains and seas. The fierce beast released by the sword intent released by Jouabufan seemed to feel threatened. It threw its head back and roared, which sounded like a miserable howl. Boom! The next moment, the sword shadow flew across the air, directly pierced through the fierce beast, and then attacked Jouabufan. No! In an instant, Jouabufan felt a terrible killing intent. He immediately screamed, and his handsome face turned as pale as a sheet of paper. At this moment, he felt an extremely strong aura of death, which made him tremble from the bottom of his heart. In addition to being mighty and powerful, Nye sword intent also had a sense of oppression that could take one's heart and soul. While crushing the opponent, it could also completely crush the opponent psychologically. What a terrible sword! Jouabufan is dead for sure. When the crowd saw this scene, they were extremely shocked and cried out one after another. Nye sword shadow was so terrifying that it simply crushed Jouabufan. At this moment, everyone realized that Nye didn't show his real strength at all. He was just playing with Jouabufan. Now that Nye revealed his real combat strength, Jouabufan immediately became vulnerable. On the high viewing platform, Gongsun Xing and Xian Zongfeng, the two sword masters, stood up at the same time, showing a look of horror. However, what surprised them was completely different. Gongsun Xing was worried about Jouabufan's life, while Xian Zongfeng was shocked by Nye strength. Jouabufan didn't meet his expectations. Bang! However, just when everyone was certain that Jouabufan would definitely die, the sword shadow in the air suddenly shattered and turned into sword intent that dissipated in the air. Jouabufan felt the impact of the sword intent, and his figure retreated thousands of meters away. When he stood still, his body was already drenched in sweat. You won't kill me? Zhuo Bufan was stunned on the spot for more than 10 seconds before he came to his senses and looked at Nie Tian in astonishment. In this battle, Zhuo Bufan showed the strongest killing intent. He had the idea of killing Nie Tian. Unfortunately, his strength was insufficient and he was not Nie Tian's match at all. Nie Tian originally had the chance to kill Zhuo Bufan, but he did not do it, or rather, he gave up, which made the latter very puzzled. Because if it was Zhuo Bufan, he would definitely kill Nie Tian without the slightest hesitation. Zhuo Bufan, I just said that the battle between us is over, but I didn't say that I want your life. Nie Tian looked at Zhuo Bufan and smiled faintly. The sword intent on his body immediately dissipated. After saying that, Nie Tian moved and was about to leave, but he was stopped by Zhuo Bufan. Nie Tian, why didn't you kill me? Don't you know that I really want to kill you? Zhuo Bufan calmed down and asked with a low face. There is no reason. Nie Tian didn't look back. He just smiled faintly and said, If you must know why, then consider it as me giving face to His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master. His calm voice fell, but the surrounding people were stunned. Giving face to His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master? Nie Tian's words seemed to be a bit exaggerated. Who was His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master? He was the supreme person of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda and the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms. His high status was self-evident. What about Nie Tian? Nie Tian was indeed very famous now. He was absolutely in the limelight, but this was compared to swordsmen of the same generation. If he was compared to an expert like Gongsun Xingji, it would be too high a compliment. Even if the status of Nie Tian and Gongsun Xingji could not be described as completely different, there was not much difference. Nie Tian said in public that he was giving face to Gongsun Xingji, which made him suspect that he was using Gongsun Xingji to elevate himself. In the eyes of many people, Nie Tian's words were very shameless and somewhat shameless. Zhuo Bufan was stunned at first, then he sneered and said loudly, Nie Tian, you overestimate yourself. Do you think you are worthy of giving face to His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master? Zhuo Bufan was very grateful that Nie Tian did not kill him, but what Nie Tian said just now was regarded as another provocation to the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, which made his anger rise again. At this time, the others also began to discuss. Nie Tian's words are a little too shameless. What kind of status does His Excellency have? He thinks too highly of himself to be on the same level as His Excellency. That's too much. That's right. Even if Nie Tian is now more famous than everyone else, he is too arrogant to put himself on the same level as His Excellency the Divine Sword Master. His Excellency the Divine Sword Master is the best swordsman in the 9 regions. Nie Tian is just a junior, yet he wants to give face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master. What a joke! Nie Tian frowned slightly and immediately realized that what he had just said was not appropriate. He could not help but smile bitterly. In fact, Nie Tian's real intention at this moment was indeed to give face to Gongsun Xingji, so he did not kill Zhuo Bufan. However, it was a little uncomfortable for him to say this out loud. Gongsun Xingji was extremely famous in the 9 regions, especially in the hearts of swordsmen. He was almost like a god and could not be desecrated. Nie Tian's words just now had accidentally angered everyone. Zhuo Bufan, since you think that I am not worthy of giving face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master, I will take back my words. Nie Tian thought for a moment and was about to take back his words, but he was interrupted by a voice in the middle of his sentence. Mr. Nie Tian. A powerful voice resounded in the sky. Then a figure appeared and landed in front of everyone. He said loudly, You didn't kill Zhuo Bufan, which is a great honor to the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. I, Gongsun Xing, am extremely grateful. Everyone's eyes suddenly trembled. They looked as if they had eaten a pig's gallbladder. They were as shocked as they could be and as ugly as they could be. At this moment, the person who stood out to speak was the divine sword master, Gongsun Xingji. Moreover, everyone heard very clearly that Gongsun Xingji did not directly call Nie Tian by his name. Instead, he added the word Mr. behind it. Everyone knew that the word Mr. was a respectful title that warriors used to address people they respected. Most of the time, the word Mr. carried more weight than His Excellency. Gongsun Xingji's way of addressing Nie Tian was enough to show that he did not put Nie Tian on the same level as himself. Instead, he put Nie Tian on a higher level than himself. In Gongsun Xingji's eyes, Nie Tian was someone who was superior to him. By the time everyone understood everything, their faces were filled with extreme shock. No words could describe the shock in their hearts. Everyone had heard that Nie Tian had forced Gongsun Xingji to lower his head and bring forward the evil-edged sword competition. Logically speaking, shouldn't Gongsun Xingji hate Nie Tian very much? Why was he still showing respect to him? This was too strange. Chapter 2002. Nie Tian didn't look too good either. He didn't expect Gongsun Xing to step out to help him. In the end, he could only smile awkwardly and say, "Divine Sword Master, you're being too serious." Of course, he knew that Gongsun Xing was willing to step out and call him Mr. in front of everyone because he could save Gongsun Xing's life. At this moment, Gongsun Xingji was standing up for himself, not for Nie Tian. If Nie Tian hadn't saved his life, Gongsun Xing definitely wouldn't have stepped out. Gongsun Xing smiled faintly. Then, he looked into the void and a strange smile appeared on his face. He said loudly, "Alliance Master Jiang, since you're here, why don't you show yourself?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his heart sank when he heard Gongsun Xing's words. Gongsun Xing called out, "Alliance Master Jiang," which made Nie Tian's expression change instantly. There were only two famous alliance masters in the 9 major realms. One was the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master, and the other was the Xingtian Alliance Master. If Gongsun Xing called out Alliance Master Jiang, it was undoubtedly the Xingtian Alliance Master Jiang Lai. Jiang Lai had actually come to the evil-edged sword duel. The news made Nie Tian's head spin. He followed Gongsun Xing's gaze and looked in the direction Gongsun Xing was looking. Nie Tian wasn't the only one who was surprised. The others were also stunned for a moment before they reacted and looked in the same direction. The void was completely silent. There was nothing there. However, at this moment the void trembled slightly. Then, a figure in green appeared with a faint smile on his lips. He said loudly, "Brother Gongsun, how have you been?" The azure-robed figure took a step forward and arrived less than 100 meters away from Gongsun Xingji. The moment this figure appeared, Nie Tian's pupils shrank. The shock in his eyes was extreme. The figure in green that appeared in front of him was none other than the Xingtian Alliance Master, Jiang Lai. After all, Jiang Lai and Nie Tian had a deep grudge against each other. Most directly, Jiang Lai was the main culprit behind Jian Qingqi's death. Moreover, Jiang Lai was also the person who forced Nie Tian to separate from Mo Rushi and share. Also, when Nie Tian's father was imprisoned by the Holy Parliament, Jiang Lai was one of the accomplices. With so much hatred entangled together, Nie Tian's hatred for Jiang Lai was no less than Calamity 9's. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some rationality left, Nie Tian would have definitely gone up to fight Jiang Lai. He did not do so because he knew that he was too weak and was not a match for Jiang Lai at all. According to what Nie Tian knew, there were 4 supreme existences in the 9 major realms, and one of them was Jiang Lai. He also knew of the other 3. One was the Sacred Alliance leader 9 Gods Calamity, one was the Wind and Cloud Alliance leader Nie Dao, and the last was the Heaven Chief of the Net above and Earth. It was not an exaggeration to say that Jiang Lai was stronger than Gongsun Xing. The moment Mr. Jiang Lai appeared, Guiwu Quangsha's eyes darkened as anger rose in his eyes. However, he still suppressed the anger in his heart and did not make a move. Now was not the time to reveal his trump cards to Jiang Lai. Moreover, Guiwu Sha knew that his strength was far below Jiang Lai's. Alliance leader Xingtian's presence has truly surprised I. Gongsun Xing nodded with a smile, appearing very enthusiastic. Although Jiang Lai used to be a member of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, his status was not the same as before. Even Gongsun Xing, who was the Divine Sword Master, could only barely be on equal footing with Jiang Lai. I had nothing to do, so I just came to take a look. Jiang Lai smiled faintly as his gaze swept across the crowd. When he saw Nie Tian, his eyes clearly flickered for a moment before returning to normal. At this moment, the audience below was in an uproar. Their expressions were extremely excited as they looked at Jiang Lai with scorching eyes and incomparable respect. Alliance leader Xingtian was one of the pinnacle existences in the 9 major realms. To be able to witness his peerless grace was a great honor even for ordinary people. However, there was not the slightest bit of respect in Nie Tian's eyes at this moment. There was only anger and killing intent. He knew that Jiang Lai's appearance here was definitely not as simple as taking a look. Jiang Lai's arrival was most likely because of Nie Tian. However, with Jiang Lai's status, he would definitely not make a move against Nie Tian in front of so many people. Therefore, he must have other methods to deal with Nie Tian. Alliance leader Jiang, please. Gongsun Xing smiled faintly and turned to the side, inviting Jiang Lai to the highest viewing platform. Wait. Jiang Lai smiled faintly at this moment. He raised his head and looked at the void. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile as he said in a loud voice, "Brother Nangong, and that unknown friend over there, since you are all here, please come out and meet me." Jiang Lai's words stunned everyone as they looked at the void. Who would have thought that there would be someone in the void? Oh! Gongsun Xing was also stunned. His expression instantly became strange. He had never expected that there would be 2 experts hidden in the void. The 2 hidden experts were obviously not weaklings. Otherwise, they would not have been able to conceal their auras so perfectly. Alliance leader Jiang, Sword Master Gongsun, Nangong Duxiu greets you. At this moment, a voice resounded in the void. Following which, a black-clothed figure appeared and stepped on the void, arriving beside Jiang Lai and Gongsun Xing. Nangong Duxiu. Nie Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at the black-clothed figure. His eyes that had just calmed down trembled once again. The person who had appeared was his other great enemy, the Deputy President of the Holy Parliament, Nangong Duxiu. Back in the Divine Shepherd domain, Nie Tian had fought with Nangong Duxiu and almost died at her hands. He did not expect that the Evil Peak Sword competition would not only alarm Jiang Lai, but also Nangong Duxiu. The Heaven Punishment Alliance and the Holy Parliament were 2 supreme experts of the 2 Peak factions. It was a rare sight to see such a scene at the same time. President Nangong, no wonder I felt a familiar aura. It's you. It seems that you have concealed yourself better than me. Jiang Lai looked at Nangong Duxiu and said with a faint smile, "Alliance leader Jiang, you must be joking. I just don't want to cause any unnecessary trouble." Nangong Duxiu also smiled and looked at Gongsun Xing. "Sword Master Gongsun, I hope you won't blame me for coming uninvited." "Not at all. It is the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda's honor to have President Nangong personally come to the Evil Peak Sword competition." Gongsun Xing was puzzled, but he still looked calm on the surface. At this moment, Gongsun Xing had already sensed that something was wrong. If Jiang Lai's arrival was just a coincidence, then it could barely be explained. However, Nangong Duxiu's subsequent appearance was very strange. The strangest thing was that the 2 of them had been hiding in the dark. If Gongsun Xing had not accidentally discovered Jiang Lai, the 2 of them would not have come out. It was too unusual for 2 peak experts to appear at the Evil Peak Sword competition at the same time. It seemed that the 2 of them had come with a purpose. Gongsun Xing already had a guess as to what their purpose was. It was Nie Tian. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu had come for Nie Tian. Just at this moment, the space trembled once again. Soon after, another figure appeared. However, he stood far away in the sky and did not descend. Jiang Lai, Nangong Duxiu, Gongsun Sheng, and the others raised their heads in confusion. They did not know this person. Chapter 2003. Firestorm Thousand Feathers. Gui Wuquang Sha shouted a name in his heart and his face instantly became dull. Although he was tens of thousands of meters away from the figure in the sky and the latter had used a special method to hide his face, he could still tell from the latter's aura that this person was Thousand Feather Tower's master, Firestorm Thousand Feathers. Firestorm Thousand Feathers used to be Gui Wuquang Sha's disciple and was even brought up by Gui Wuquang Sha. The latter was too familiar with this aura and would never mistake it. Gui Wuquang Sha was very sure that the figure in the sky was Firestorm Thousand Feathers. In fact, Gui Wuquang Sha had a premonition that Thousand Feather Tower was going to make a big move against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but he was still surprised when Firestorm Thousand Feathers actually appeared. The appearance of Firestorm Thousand Feathers also attracted the attention of others. Most of them looked shocked. "Who are you?" Gongsun Shing looked at Firestorm Thousand Feathers from afar and his deep voice resounded in the air with a strong sense of oppression. Although Feng Huiqian Yu was restraining his aura, he was still unable to conceal his aura. He stood there like a vast ocean, vast and vigorous. "A debt collector," Firestorm Thousand Feathers said coldly. His aura was cold. Even the people who were tens of thousands of meters away could feel the chill. "A debt collector?" Gongsun Shing heard what Firestorm Thousand Feathers said and asked doubtfully, "Who are you? Do you have any grudges against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda?" Gongsun Shing didn't know who Firestorm Thousand Feathers was at all. He was in a mess. But he could feel that Firestorm Thousand Feathers' aura was very strong, even slightly stronger than him. He had never seen such a fearsome swordsman before, and he felt a genuine sense of threat from him. "Gongsun Shing, you will know who I am soon. You don't have much time left. I will make my move when the Evil Edge sword competition ends. Treasure it." Firestorm Thousand Feathers released a cold aura and his deep voice was very scary. When everyone heard this, their eyes were filled with astonishment. Firestorm Thousand Feathers' words were a threat, a naked threat. To publicly threaten the Divine Sword Master during the Evil Peak sword meet was simply too arrogant. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu glanced at each other with a casual smile on their faces. They clearly had no intention of saying anything and were just watching the show from the side. "How dare you, sir?" Gongsun Shingji's eyes darkened, and his expression changed abruptly. His entire body was filled with murderous intent, and a terrifying sword momentum was immediately released. It was like a rainbow piercing through the heavens and earth, mighty and chilling. "What a strong sword force!" Everyone exclaimed when they felt the terrifying pressure of the sword force. However, the wind flame Thousand Feathers in the sky was not afraid at all. He sneered and said loudly, "Gongsun Shingji, you are indeed worthy of being the #1 swordsman in the 9 major realms. You actually broke through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. This is really an eye-opener. The legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts." As the wind flame Thousand Feathers' words fell, everyone's eyes trembled, and they cried out in surprise at the same time. Most of the people present were swordsmen. Of course, they understood what the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one meant. It had been nearly 1,000,000 years since a legendary swordsman appeared in the 9 major realms. At this moment, Gongsun Shingji revealed his true strength, and it was imaginable how shocked everyone was. "I will ask you again, who are you?" Gongsun Shingji growled in a deep voice, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. "Gongsun Shingji, don't be so anxious. Now is not the time for us to fight. I still have some things that I don't understand. When I understand everything, It will be the time for us to fight to the death, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers said coldly. Feng Huiqian, you said coldly. Before he finished speaking, his figure suddenly moved and he stretched out his hand. Instantly, a vast and boundless mighty force appeared and filled the air. It actually enveloped Zhuo Bufan. How dare you? Gongsun Xingji frowned, and he immediately understood. He roared, stepped forward, and directly slapped with his palm. Using his palm as a sword, he condensed a sword shadow and blocked Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' attack. Zhuo Bufan was already scared out of his wit. He did not dare to move, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. How dare you attack someone from the divine martial sword pagoda in front of me? Gongsun Xingji looked at Wind Flame Thousand Feathers with a gloomy face and roared crazily. Although he was extremely angry, he did not directly attack Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, as if he was afraid of something. Of course, Nie Tian knew what Gongsun Xingji was worried about. Because of the forbidden blood seal in his body, he could not fully use his swordsmanship strength. If he really fought with Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, it was difficult to say who would win. With Gongsun Xingji's fiery temper, if it was not for the forbidden blood seal in his body, he would have already killed Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Gongsun Xingji, there is something in this boy's body that I am interested in. I really want to know who left that thing in his body. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers smiled coldly, and then his body moved. His whole body surged with a huge sword essence, and a wall of fire appeared in the air, separating Gongsun Xingji. Then, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers grabbed with his hand, and a mighty force pressed towards Zhuo Bufan. It seemed that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers was very interested in Zhuo Bufan. Don't even think about it! Gongsun Xingji shouted angrily, and the long sword in his hand suddenly stabbed out. A terrible sword shadow appeared, and it bombarded the wall of fire in the air. Rumble! The air suddenly trembled, and the strange thing was that Gongsun Xingji's sword actually could not break the wall of fire. Gongsun Xingji frowned, and his face instantly darkened. He once again blasted out his sword, and finally, the wall of fire was smashed into pieces. But unfortunately, at this time, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' figure was already gone, and Zhuo Bufan also disappeared together with him. Damn it! Gongsun Xingji could not feel the breath of Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. He roared angrily, and all the hair on his body stood up, like an angry lion. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers actually kidnapped Zhuo Bufan in front of him. How could Gongsun Xingji not be angry? At this time, everyone present was stunned. No one thought that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' strength was so strong that he could actually take Zhuo Bufan away under Gongsun Xingji's eyes. Everyone had some doubts in their hearts. It seemed that Gongsun Xingji's strength was not as strong as they thought. Since Gongsun Xingji has broken through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one, his strength should not be limited to this. Could it be that there is something strange about this matter? Jiang Lai also had doubts in his heart, but he did not think too much about it because it was none of his business. At this moment, the person with the most embarrassed expression was not Gongsun Xingji, but Xian Zongfeng. At this time, Xian Zongfeng's expression was not only embarrassed, but also panicked. Why did Wind Flame Thousand Feathers take Zhuo Bufan away? Perhaps others did not know the reason, but Xian Zongfeng vaguely guessed something, and that was why his expression was so embarrassed. On the other side, Nie Tian's brows were also slightly furrowed. He had also guessed something. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers said that there was something in Zhuo Bufan's body that he was interested in, and he wanted to know who left this thing in Zhuo Bufan's body. What was this thing? Chapter 2004. Blood-Weeping Sword Infant. Nie Tian believed that the thing that the Firestorm Thousand Feathers was interested in was precisely the blood-weeping sword infant. While Nie Tian was surprised, he also saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction clearly. This made him even more certain that the thing that Feng Huiqian you wanted to figure out was the blood-weeping sword infant. Feng Hua Qianyu said it very clearly. He really wanted to know who left the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufan's body. The person who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufan's body was none other than Xian Zongfeng. This was the reason why Xian Zongfeng panicked. Nie Tian was very puzzled. Why would the firestorm Thousand Feathers be interested in the blood-weeping sword infant? According to Guiwu Quangsha, the grudge between Feng Hua Qianyu and the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was mainly because Feng Hua Qianyu's father, Feng Hua Lianqing, had died during a mission of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Wind and Fire thought that it was the Shenwu Sword Pagoda that killed his father, so he wanted to seek revenge on the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Could it be that the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters have something to do with the blood-weeping sword infant? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled as a shocking thought appeared in his mind. Guiwu Quangsha had said that the Wind and Fire Duo Qing was once the sword champion of the Evil Edge sword discourse. There was no need to doubt his talent in the way of the sword. The blood-weeping sword infant liked swordsmen with high talent in the sword Dao. The higher the swordsman's talent in the sword Dao, the stronger the blood-weeping sword infant would be. From this point of view, if Xian Zongfeng had wanted to find a suitable host for the blood-sobbing sword infant from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Wind and Fire were undoubtedly the most suitable candidates. Could it be that the Wind and Fire Masters were the same as Lian Wui? They were both chosen by Xian Zongfeng to be the host of the blood-weeping sword infant. Nie Tian's mind was working fast, and his expression changed again. In the beginning, he felt that his idea was too outrageous, but as he slowly analyzed it, he felt that the possibility was very high. Guiwu Quangsha also felt that there was something fishy about the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters. However, he was unable to find any suspicious points. The blood-weeping sword infant was hidden very deeply. Even Gongsun Xingji didn't discover the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body. It was reasonable that Guiwu Quangsha didn't find the blood-weeping sword infant. Feng Hua Qianyu had always believed that his father was killed by the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. He must have found something, most likely the blood-tear sword infant. Nie Tian analyzed all of this, and the shock in his heart was written on his face. He vaguely felt that perhaps Xian Zongfeng was the culprit behind the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters. However, all of this was just his conjecture, and he didn't have any proof. Perhaps, when the Wind Flame Thousand Feathers appeared again, the truth would surface. The appearance of Jiang Lai and the others caused a huge commotion. It took a long time for the crowd to calm down. Gongsun Xing had already returned to the high viewing platform. Beside him were two important figures: Xingtian Alliance Master Jiang Lai and the Holy Assembly's Vice President Nangong Duxiu. There were too many experts in this evil edge sword duel. The atmosphere of the entire scene was a little strange. The sword chiefs' competition continued. The battles of the top 16 were very exciting, but there was a difference in strength between the two sides. Presumably, the Shenwu Sword Pagoda had left the top 8 for last. Nie Tian was the first to enter the top 8, and half a day later, the top 8 had all appeared. They were Nie Tian, Songlan, Xianyuan Yunsong, Windfire, Bing Hong, Snow Spirit, Evil Soul Remnant, Lian Wui, and Jiang Yuji. Phantasm Life Destroyer was the name of the ghost-faced swordsman. The crowd was in an uproar. The top 8 are finally here. They're all very strong, especially Sagely Sword Kanglin. He's a late paramount god, and has a high-level sword and martial fusion cultivation base. He's definitely going to be the sword chief in this evil edge sword competition. That's right. No wonder Sagely Sword Kanglin is a swordsman from the Holy Assembly. He's a terrifying swordsman who can wield a sage sword. Anyone else would be nothing but cannon fodder against him. Not necessarily. Fenghua Ice and Phantasm Life Destroyer are both very strong. If Sagely Sword Kanglin meets strong opponents, he might not be able to make it to the end. Don't tell me you've forgotten about Nie Tian? He's the one who brought this evil-edged sword competition forward. Up until now, no one has ever forced him to use his true strength. Nie Tian might be strong, but he's only a godlord. Even if he has a secret magic that pushes him to the early paramount god level, there's no way he'll be a match for the others. The way I see it, the fact that Nie Tian brought the evil-edged sword competition forward is just going to benefit someone else. He's only going to be a supporting character in the Sword Chief's competition. I agree. If Nie Tian were a few thousand years older, he might be able to fight sagely sword Kanglin and the others. But right now that's not going to happen. The discussions of the crowd rose one after another. When the top 8 cultivators heard them, some of them were laughing, while others were feeling bitter. Most people were of the opinion that sagely sword Kanglin would definitely take first place in the evil-edged sword competition. If there was anyone who could pose a threat to Kanglin, it would be Fenghua Ice and Phantasm Life Destroyer. Both of them were mid-paramount gods, and Phantasm Life Destroyer could use his sword will to create illusions that were very bizarre. As for Nie Tian and the others, they were completely ignored. Obviously, they weren't strong enough to compete for the title of Sword Chief. Nie Tian's reaction was very calm. He wasn't the type of person who would be affected by what anyone said. After all, he had experienced countless deadly battles, and had long since reached the level of being as calm as still water. His opponents were the other top 8, not these gossiping spectators. Kanglin's eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, and he didn't care about what the crowd was saying. In fact, he didn't even care about the title of Sword Chief. His only goal in participating in the evil-edged sword competition was to kill Nie Tian. Of course, Songlan wouldn't mind killing Nie Tian and taking the title of Sword Chief in the evil-edged sword competition. On the other side, Phantasm Life Destroyer's cold eyes were locked onto Nie Tian. His goal in participating in the evil-edged sword competition was the same as Kanglin's, to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tian had guessed correctly. Phantasm Life Destroyer was indeed an assassin. His true identity was the leader of the 13 reverse scale spike. The 13 reverse scale spikes were the most terrifying assassins of the reverse scale, and Nie Tian had killed them before. Phantasm Life Destroyer had come to the evil-edged sword competition not only to carry out his mission, but also to take revenge. Both Sagely Sword Kanglin and Phantasm Life Destroyer would be Nie Tian's most terrifying opponents. In the battle of the top 8, the two sides were no longer specially arranged. Instead, they were drawn randomly. Nie Tian was confident that he could defeat anyone, but if he had to defeat Phantasm Life Destroyer first, then fight Kanglin, he would be in danger. Nie Tian prayed in his heart that it would be best if Kanglin fought Phantasm Life Destroyer or Wind Fire Ice Great Sword first. Top 8 battles, first match, Nie Tian vs Jiang Yuji. At this moment, the referee's voice rang out in the void, announcing the start of the first match of the top 8. When Nie Tian heard his own voice and heard that his opponent was Jiang Yuji, he couldn't help but smile. Jiang Yuji had been defeated by him, so he was naturally very happy to meet this opponent. Wait! However, at this moment, a vigorous voice suddenly rang out, and a figure stepped out from the sky. Chapter 2005. Jiang Lai suddenly appeared and stopped the battle between Nie Tian and Jiang Yuji. Everyone was stunned and raised their heads to look at him. Jiang Lai stood in the air with a faint smile on his face. He did not speak immediately and seemed to be thinking about something. Nie Tian looked at Jiang Lai from afar with a cold smile on his face. He thought to himself, Jiang Lai, you better make Jiang Yuji admit defeat. Otherwise, I will kill him in front of you. Nie Tian believed that Jiang Lai definitely knew that he would not show mercy to Jiang Yuji. That was why he came out to stop the battle. He had already made up his mind that as long as Jiang Yuji stepped onto the sword field, he would not let him walk out alive. Alliance leader Jiang, is there something wrong? Gongsun Xing could not help but frown when he saw that Jiang Lai did not speak. There had been too many accidents in this evil-edged sword duel. Gongsun Xing would not allow any more accidents to happen. Brother Gongsun, every evil-edged sword duel is a one-on-one battle. Don't you think this method of battle is too monotonous? Jiang Lai's lips curled into a strange smile as he spoke. Gongsun Xing was stunned and asked, Alliance Leader Jiang, what do you mean by that? The evil-edged sword duel and the sword chief duel were meant to be one-on-one battles. Was there any other method of battle? The others were also confused, not knowing what Jiang Lai was up to. What I mean is, since the top 8 have already been decided, why not let them fight together and have a real battle? The one who remains will be the sword chief. This way, not only will we be able to determine the strongest person, but it will also increase the enjoyment of the battle. In the end, we can even end the top 8 in one battle. Why not? Jiang Lai's lips curled up slightly as he spoke with a gloomy expression. Fight together? Gongsun Xing was stunned and frowned. Alliance Leader Jiang, do you want the top 8 to have a big battle royale? What's wrong with that? Jiang Lai smiled calmly. At this moment, the crowd finally understood what Jiang Lai meant. The scene immediately exploded. A battle royale between the top 8 has never happened before. If it really happened, it would be very exciting. Yes, the top 8 are all genius swordsmen. A one-on-one battle royale is already exciting enough. If all 8 of them fight at the same time, it would be too much to watch. Alliance Leader Jiang's suggestion is not bad. We can give it a try. Only the strongest person will be able to survive until the end. The crowd excitedly discussed and actually agreed with Jiang Lai's suggestion. Nie Tian furrowed his eyebrows, his expression extremely unsightly. Jiang Lai was truly cunning. He must have realized that Kanglin's sacred sword and life destroyer had strong killing intent towards Nie Tian. That was why he had suggested such a method of battle. If Song Lan and the evil soul remnant attacked Nie Tian at the battle royale, how would he be? Jiang and Nie Tian would not be able to win. Each of Tian and Tian would Jiang and Tian, Jiang would be able. Tian would and Tian. To be Roy would be able and Tian and be Chen, Jiang and Jiang not. Tian and Chen and Shen, Chen, Jiang, 1 Tian, Chen, Feng, Yu, Jiang, Shen, Jiang, Tian, Jiang, and Ji Shen. Jiang, Tian. Jiang from Tian at Chen, Tian, Jiang, Tian. No. Absolutely not. Gongsun Xing shouted angrily. The Evil Peak sword competition has always been one-on-one battles. There has never been a battle royale. Alliance Leader Jiang's suggestion is absolutely unacceptable. Jiang Lai had already expected Gongsun Xingji's reaction, so he was not surprised at all. With a faint smile, he looked at Nangong Duxiu and said loudly, Brother Nangong, what do you think of my suggestion? Alliance Leader Jiang's suggestion is very good. I wholeheartedly agree with it. Nangong Duxiu, who had obviously seen through Jiang Lai's intention, smiled and responded. Alliance Leader Nangong, you. Gongsun Xing was stunned and looked at Nangong Duxiu in astonishment. He felt so stifled that he could not say anything. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu were working together to force Gongsun Xing to agree. One of them was Alliance Leader Xing Tian, while the other was the Vice President of the Sacred Assembly. Both of them represented a faction stronger than the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. On the surface, Jiang Lai was giving advice to Gongsun Xing, but he was actually pressuring him. Everyone, what do you think of the battle royale for the top 8? Jiang Lai looked at the crowd and shouted loudly. Alliance Leader Jiang's suggestion is very good. We agree to the battle royale. Everyone was in high spirits and shouted, Battle royale! Battle royale! Battle royale! Then, everyone started to shout at the same time, as if they had gone crazy. They were just here to watch the show. The more exciting the battle, the better. They did not care about anything else. This. Gongsun Xing's expression darkened. He was so embarrassed that he could not say anything. Brother Gongsun, it is not good to offend everyone. Jiang Lai, on the other hand, had a calm expression on his face as he said, since everyone is so enthusiastic, why don't Brother Gongsun make an exception and let the top 8 have a battle royale? Brother Gongsun, Alliance Leader Jiang's suggestion is not unreasonable. Suddenly, another voice came from behind Gongsun Xing. It was Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng, you. Gongsun Xing looked at Xian Zongfeng in disbelief. He did not expect Xian Zongfeng to stab him in the back. The light in Gongsun Xing's eyes dimmed, and he seemed to have aged a few decades. He knew that if he insisted on this, it would bring disaster to the divine martial sword pagoda. After some thought, Gongsun Xing finally looked up and said with difficulty, "A battle royale is fine, but all 8 must agree." "Okay, no problem." Seeing that Gongsun Xing had finally relented, Jiang Lai smiled faintly. Then, he turned to look at Nie Tian and the others and said in a loud voice, "A mixed battle among the 8 strongest experts." "I agree." Jiang Yuji was the first to agree. "Me too." "Me too." Song Lan and the Evil Soul Remnant said at the same time. "Me too." Feng Hua and Bing Hong stood up. After the 4 agreed, there was a moment of silence. Nie Tian did not speak and Xianyuan Yunsong would not either. Cher and Lian Wui were also looking at Nie Tian. "Oi!" At this time, Xian Zongfeng's voice was heard, shouting towards Lian Wui. Lian Wui hesitated for a second but nodded in agreement. Xian Zongfeng was her teacher after all, and she did not want to go against him. Only Nie Tian and the other 2 were left. If Nie Tian didn't speak, the other 2 wouldn't either. "Nie Tian, it's your turn." Jiang Lai had an evil smile on his face as he looked at Nie Tian. He looked calm, as if he was not worried that Nie Tian would refuse. Alliance Leader Jiang. Nie Tian raised his head to look at Jiang Lai with a fierce look in his eyes and said in a loud voice, "I can agree to your proposal, but I have one condition." "What condition?" "Let's hear it." Jiang Lai raised an eyebrow and smiled. "I want one of your swords." Nie Tian's reaction was also calm, and his voice was flat. "A sword?" Jiang Lai's expression changed and he asked, "What sword?" Chapter 2006. The Inkjade Dragon Sword. That was what Nie Tian wanted. The reason why he wanted the Inkjade Dragon Sword was because Jian Qingqi's soul was imprisoned in the sword. Nie Tian had wanted to ask Gongsun Xingji to make this request to Jiang Lai after the evil-edged sword duel. However, he had suddenly changed his mind. Nie Tian had overestimated the power of the Shunwu sword pagoda. Judging by how Jiang Lai was forcing Gongsun Xingji to change the rules of the duel, Jiang Lai did not think much of the Shunwu sword pagoda. Gongsun Xingji's influence would not allow Jiang Lai to hand over the Inkjade Dragon Sword. Fortunately, there was a great opportunity in front of Nie Tian to make a request to Jiang Lai. Nie Tian would not let go of such an opportunity. Although he knew that the battle royale would be very disadvantageous to him, he was willing to take the risk to save Jian Qingqi. The Inkjade Dragon Sword. Jiang Lai's expression changed when he heard Nie Tian's words. He exclaimed in his heart. He had never expected that Nie Tian would make a request for the Inkjade Dragon Sword. The Inkjade Dragon Sword. The others had the same reaction when they heard Nie Tian's words. Their eyes flickered as if they could not believe that Nie Tian would make such a request. Nie Tian's gaze froze when he saw the crowd's reaction. It seemed that the Inkjade Dragon Sword was very famous and everyone knew of its existence. Then, the crowd came to their senses and exclaimed, "I can't believe Nie Tian actually wants the Inkjade Dragon Sword. He's really asking for a lion's share." Yeah, the Inkjade Dragon Sword is comparable to a sacred sword. Rumor has it that the Inkjade Dragon Sword is also a sacred weapon. Nie Tian wants a sacred weapon as soon as he opens his mouth. He is indeed greedy. After hearing everyone's words, Nie Tian finally understood that the Inkjade Dragon Sword was actually comparable to the sacred sword. It sounded like the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was also a Saint Tier sword. Gong Sun Xing's expression suddenly changed. He believed that Jiang Lai would never agree to Nie Tian's conditions. What kind of treasure was the Ink Jade Dragon Sword? Jiang Lai would definitely not dare to risk it. Alliance leader Jiang, how about it? Are you willing to accept my conditions? Nie Tian smiled faintly. Since the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was so famous, he was relieved. The Ink Jade Dragon Sword itself was a priceless treasure. It was normal for Nie Tian to want it, and it would not arouse Jiang Lai's suspicions. Nie Tian, this condition of yours is really big. As expected of someone with the surname Nie. Jiang Lai smiled faintly and said, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is the only sword in the 9 major realms that can contend against the sacred sword. Your strength is too weak, and I'm afraid that you won't be able to control this sword, so I suggest you change your condition. Sure enough, Jiang Lai wasn't willing to risk the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, because this sword had a very special meaning to him. Alliance leader Jiang, whether or not I can control the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is my business. If you aren't willing to accept this condition, then I will also refuse to participate in the battle royale of the top 8. Let's just have a duel. Nie Tian smiled faintly, perfectly concealing the nervousness in his heart. Jiang Lai was stunned. After a few seconds of silence, he said, Nie Tian, since you insist on having the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, then I will agree to it. Everyone was stunned when they heard Jiang Lai's words. Their faces were filled with surprise and doubt. No one expected that Jiang Lai would actually agree to Nie Tian's condition and was willing to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart and said, Alliance leader Jiang, with your status, you won't go back on your word, right? As the alliance leader of the Sky Punishing Alliance, my words naturally carry enormous weight. Jiang Lai smiled faintly and then said, however, if you want to obtain the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, you must fulfill a condition of mine. What condition? Nie Tian's gaze tightened. It seemed that obtaining the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was not easy. It's very simple. The corner of Jiang Lai's mouth rose as he said, as long as you can obtain the position of Sword Chief in the Evil Peak Sword Duel, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is yours. If you can't obtain it, then I'm sorry. Jiang Lai's voice was not loud, but it caused everyone present to be stunned. The position of Sword Chief was a simple condition, but it was not simple at all. Right now, the contenders that everyone favored were Tsang Lan and the Evil Soul Remnant. As for Nie Tian, no one favored him for a long time. Jiang Lai wanted Nie Tian to obtain the Sword Chief, because he wanted Nie Tian to gamble with his life. If Nie Tian did not obtain the Sword Chief, he could choose to withdraw at the crucial moment. However, if he agreed to Jiang Lai's condition, he would have to give it his all and obtain the Sword Chief. Otherwise, he would die in the battle royale of the top 8. Jiang Lai's condition seemed simple, but it was actually filled with killing intent. At this moment, everyone's gaze was on Nie Tian, waiting for him to make a decision. Of course, most people hoped that Nie Tian would agree to Jiang Lai's condition because this way, the battle royale of the top 8 would be even more exciting. Nie Tian's expression was very calm at this moment. He slowly lifted his head to look at Jiang Lai and indifferently said, Alliance leader Jiang, I agree to your condition. However, when I obtain the Sword Chief, I want to see the Ink Jade Dragon Sword immediately. Seeing Nie Tian's carefree expression, Jiang Lai couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then he laughed and said in a loud voice, no problem. The Ink Jade Dragon Sword is with me. As long as you have the ability to become the Sword Chief, I'll give it to you with both hands. Okay, it's a deal. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled into a determined smile. His entire being exuded a strong sense of confidence. He naturally knew that the reason why Jiang Lai proposed the position of Sword Chief was because he was afraid that he would withdraw midway in the battle royale of the top 8. However, he had never thought of withdrawing. He wanted the position of sword chief, and he wanted the ink jade dragon sword. Jiang Lai gloomily looked at Nie Tian and sinisterly said in his heart, Nie Tian, if you want the ink jade dragon sword, you will need to be alive to obtain it. Let alone the others, just Song Lan alone is an insurmountable mountain. Your puny life is fated to die in the battle royale of the sword chief contest. Nangong Dushou's gaze towards Nie Tian was also filled with cold killing intent. He was originally worried that Nie Tian would be afraid to fight, but now that Jiang Lai had forced Nie Tian into a position where he had no choice but to fight, he was naturally very happy. Nangong Duxiu had long been fearful of Nie Tian's rapid increase in strength. He felt threatened by Nie Tian's talent. If he allowed Nie Tian to continue growing, it would definitely not be a good thing. If Nie Tian could die at the hands of Song Lan, it would definitely be a great thing for the Sacred Parliament. Since Nie Tian agreed to the battle royale of the top 8, Xianyuan Yunsong naturally agreed as well. After all, Nie Tian had the authority to make him do anything. Cher thought for a moment and finally nodded. The top 8 had all agreed to the battle royale. A new battle was about to begin. Chapter 2007. The battle royale for the top 8 was about to begin. Gong Sun Xing had already sent people to adjust the sword fighting arenas, merging the 4 sword fighting arenas into a huge one. 8 huge stone pillars stood in a circle in the middle of the huge sword fighting arena. The 8 of you, please. A black-clothed judge appeared and shouted to Nie Tian and the others. All right. Song Lan was the first to respond. He took the lead and soared into the sky like a sharp sword, landing steadily on one of the stone pillars. Just as Song Lan landed, the evil soul remnant, Wind Fire Ice Great Sword landed almost at the same time, appearing opposite Song Lan. Then, Cher and Xianyuan Yunsong also entered the sword grounds. Nie Tian wasn't in a hurry. He waited for Lian Wui and Jiang Yuji to enter first. Yuji. But at this moment, Jiang Lai's voice suddenly sounded. You don't have to fight anymore. Withdraw from this battle. Jiang Lai's words made the entire place fall silent. Everyone was stunned. They didn't expect Jiang Lai to ask Jiang Yuji to withdraw from the battle. Father, this. Jiang Yuji was also stunned. He looked at Jiang Lai in surprise. He didn't want to withdraw from the battle just like that. Withdraw. They are too strong. You won't be able to withstand this kind of battle, Jiang Lai said calmly, but his tone was domineering. Jiang Yuji wanted to say something more, but when he saw the stern look in Jiang Lai's eyes, he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. He moved and left the sword grounds. Jiang Lai was indeed a cunning man. He saw through Nie Tian's killing intent, so he asked Jiang Yuji to withdraw from the battle in advance. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as Jiang Yuji stepped into the sword grounds, Nie Tian wouldn't let him leave alive. Wui, you should withdraw from the battle too. Right after Jiang Yuji left, Gong Sun Xing's voice sounded. He actually asked Lian Wui to withdraw from the battle as well. Lian Wui's delicate face stiffened. She was obviously unwilling to give up. It wasn't easy for her to enter the quarterfinals, but she was eliminated before the battle even started. Of course she felt bad. At that moment, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, Miss Lian, the upcoming battles will definitely be beyond your imagination. You'd better not participate in them. All right. Lian Wui sighed helplessly. She knew that Nie Tian and the others were too strong for her to contend against, and if she were to forcefully participate in the battle, her life would indeed be in danger. Jiang Yuji and Lian Wui withdrew from the battle, causing the crowd to sigh. Although the two of them were not experts, their presence made the battle a bit more exciting. Nie Tian didn't wait any longer. His figure flashed and directly stepped onto a stone pillar. 6 figures stood on the 6 towering pillars. Between them, a battle of the pinnacle was about to take place. Nie Tian, you're dead. Song Lan was the first to speak. He stared at Nie Tian with a cold, murderous look, and a strong killing intent surged in his eyes. At the same time, the evil soul remnant also fixed its eyes on Nie Tian. Its eyes were as cold as an eagle's, looking for the best opportunity to strike. On the other hand, Feng Hua and Bing Hong's faces were as calm as still water, as if the battle before them had nothing to do with them. Xianyuan Yunsong, you've completed one thing by agreeing to the battle of the top 8. What you need to do next is to try your best to survive. If you can't hold on any longer, take the initiative to withdraw. As long as you walk out of the sword field alive, you and I will not owe each other anything. Nie Tian shouted at Xianyuan Yunsong when he noticed the murderous intent of Tsang Lan and the evil soul remnant. Previously, when Xianyuan Yunsong lost to Nie Tian in the sword stone test, he had promised the latter 3 things. As long as he could walk out of the sword field alive, he would have completed the 3 things. Alright. Xianyuan Yunsong agreed. Then, he fixed his eyes on the evil soul remnant. He knew that his strength was far from Tsang Lan's, so he could only find a slightly weaker evil soul remnant. Nie Tian, I've always been curious. How could you do so many earth-shattering things with your strength? I'd like to see what's so special about you. How strong are you exactly? Tsang Lan said in a deep voice. A huge golden sword appeared in his hand. The sword light shot out for thousands of meters, illuminating the sky. The strangest thing was that the huge golden sword seemed to be made of liquid, surging into the shape of a huge sword. Oh my God, it's the sacred sword! The moment the huge golden sword appeared, everyone's eyes trembled. They couldn't believe their eyes. The sacred sword was a sacred sword in the 9 major realms. It was a famous sacred weapon. The Holy Parliament had been established for nearly 1,000,000 years. Apart from Tsang Lan, there was only one swordsman who could wield the sacred sword. It was an amazing thing that Tsang Lan could use the sacred sword as his weapon. For a swordsman, especially a powerful one, the stronger the sword in his hand, the stronger the sword will. Tsang Lan was a late-stage paramount god. His sword Dao had reached the advanced stage of sword and martial arts as one. With the sacred sword in his hand, his battle prowess was comparable to that of a peak paramount god. Tsang Lan truly lived up to the name of the sacred sword. His strength was definitely at the peak among swordsmen of the same generation. Nie Tian, I have the sacred sword in my hand. Can you block my sword? Tsang Lan's aura was as imposing as a mountain as he shouted coldly. His entire being was like a towering mountain standing on top of a mountain range. He was the ruler of this world, the ruler of everything, including Nie Tian's life. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he felt Tsang Lan's aura. Tsang Lan was very strong, much stronger than he had expected. To be honest, Nie Tian wasn't sure if he could block Tsang Lan's sword. The moment Tsang Lan unsheathed his sword, Gongsun Xingji and the others on the viewing platform were shocked. Tsang Lan's strength had exceeded everyone's expectations. Brother Gongsun, do you think Nie Tian can block Tsang Lan's sword? Nangong Duxiu, who was behind Gongsun Xingji, said in a strange tone. Of course he can. Gongsun Xingji's eyes darkened, but his expression became firm. He suddenly recalled the night when Nie Tian went berserk. He defeated him without using his sword. Gongsun Xingji didn't know what kind of power Nie Tian had awakened in his body at that time, but he believed that this power was still hidden in Nie Tian's body. Therefore, Nie Tian's strength was beyond anyone's imagination. Nie Tian, I really want to see if the legendary godfiend nascent embryo is really that strong. Jiang Lai's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he thought to himself. He didn't believe that Nie Tian could block Tsang Lan's sword unless Nie Tian used the power of the godfiend nascent embryo. The godfiend nascent embryo was a power that even Jiang Lai was afraid of. Nie Tian, the time for the sacred sword to claim your life has come. At this moment, Tsang Lan's voice resounded. Following which, the sacred sword in his hand danced wildly, causing the void to tremble. Endless sword intent gushed out and filled the air. It turned into a golden sword shadow that was 10,000 meters long, pressing down on Nietian. This sword was so powerful that it tore and destroyed everything in its path. Chapter 2008. In order to show how strong it was, and in order to kill Nietian in a single blow, Sage Sword Kanglin drew on all the power it could muster. A golden sword image that looked like a blazing sun smashed down toward Nietian. Rumble! As the sword image descended, a terrifying rumbling sound filled the air. Everyone could sense the intense sword intent, and their eyes began to tremble. Song Lan, as expected of the sacred sword Song Lan. The power of this sword is too terrifying. I'm afraid that even a mountain range would not be able to withstand the destructive power of this sword. That's right. There's no way Nietian could stand up to something like that. Nietian is dead for sure. Even if he's stronger than he is, there's no way he could survive a blow from Sage Sword Kanglin. The crowd discussed in horror. They were all sure that Nietian would definitely die after the Blue Wave sword. It had to be said that Kanglin's attack was so powerful that it caused heaven and earth to shake and shake. Compared to the golden sword image, Nietian looked so tiny that he couldn't even withstand a single blow. He was like a tiny boat in the middle of a raging storm. As the golden sword image descended, terrifying black magical symbols sprang up around Nietian, and his energy surged as he rose to the early paramount god level. Even so, there was still a huge gap between Nietian and Song Lan's strength. In the blink of an eye, defensive lights sprang up around Nietian. Astral Soul Armor, Astral Soul Shields, Violet Heavenly Lightning Armor, and Sword Intent Shields. However, as the golden sword shadow descended from the sky, the shields around Nietian shattered with a resounding boom. In the end, the golden sword image slammed into Nietian's martial body, sending him tumbling backward and drowning in a wave of sword intent. When everyone saw what was happening, their faces went stiff. Although they were certain that Nietian would definitely die, they were still shocked when they saw Nietian's figure being drowned. Nietian was a terrifying genius, but he died just like that. It was inevitable that people would sigh endlessly. He died just like that? Song Lan looked at the billowing airwaves in front of him. The corners of his mouth curled up into an extremely disdainful smile. Coldly, he said, "So this is the so-called genius. What a disappointment." Killing Nietian with a single strike made Song Lan feel happy, but at the same time, there was a trace of disappointment in his heart. It seemed that Nietian was not as strong as he had imagined. So what if you're a monstrous genius? Faced with a true gap in strength, you'll still die without even a speck of dust remaining. Before the airwaves in the air dissipated, people had already begun to make sarcastic remarks. This attitude was completely different from when they had been flattering Nietian. Nietian only has the strength of an overgod after all. No matter how strange his strength is, it's impossible for him to fight against the supreme sacred sword lord Song Lan. Most people echoed as if Nietian's death was already a foregone conclusion. At this moment, the evil soul's remnant figure moved. It was actually preparing to leave. Its goal in participating in the Evil Edge Sword competition was to kill Nietian. Now that Nietian was dead, it naturally wouldn't fight against an expert like Song Lan. Nietian. Xianyuan Yunsong's expression was very complicated. He was very upset that someone who had once defeated him had died just like that. Why? Cher's reaction was very strange and complicated. She was in a daze. She hadn't known Nietian for long, and she only knew his name. But at this moment she felt inexplicably uncomfortable. This feeling was getting stronger and stronger, and she couldn't bear it. When Nietian was killed by Song Lan, Cher suddenly felt an emptiness in her heart. It was as if someone had suddenly dug out her heart. That feeling of emptiness actually made her want to cry. Cher didn't understand why she would suddenly feel so uncomfortable when she saw the scene of Nietian being killed. She didn't know that even though Nietian's shadow was no longer in her memory, there was a kind of unforgettable feeling that was engraved in her soul. Even if her memory disappeared, this unforgettable feeling would not disappear. Everyone present was certain that Nye Tian was dead for sure. It was impossible for him to survive under the strangulation of Tsang Lan's sword will. Tsang Lan, this sword of yours is just so. However, just when everyone was certain that Nye Tian was dead, a rather mocking voice rang out in the midst of the raging sword will in the sky. Nye Tian. The crowd was stunned at first, but then they recognized that the voice belonged to Nye Tian. Nye Tian actually didn't die. When everyone realized this, they all put on the most shocked expression they had ever had in their lives. Originally, everyone was certain that Nye Tian had died under Tsang Lan's sword shadow. But the shocking thing was that Nye Tian didn't die. He was still alive. Impossible! Tsang Lan's eyes darkened, and he couldn't help but exclaim. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How could he have imagined that Nye Tian was actually still alive? Just as Tsang Lan's exclamation faded, a blood-red figure appeared in the sky. His entire body was stained with blood, but his aura was extremely powerful. Especially his eyes, which were like those of an evil wolf, staring fixedly at Tsang Lan. You, how could you not be dead? Tsang Lan immediately reacted, and he roared in anger like a wild beast. His sword had clearly destroyed all of Nye Tian's defenses. Nye Tian's physical body was exposed to his sword will. How could it possibly withstand the sharp sword will's strangulation? Tsang Lan was very clear about that kind of power. Not even the body of a divine beast could withstand it, let alone a human's martial body. Unless Nye Tian's physical body had reached the level of a pinnacle paramount god. However, Nye Tian was clearly only at the level of a lord. Even after activating the forbidden technique, he could barely reach the level of an early-stage paramount god. His strength was so weak, how could he possibly reach the level of a pinnacle paramount god? Could it be that he was a monster? At that moment, the corner of Nye Tian's mouth curled up into a strange smile. His body trembled slightly, and he wiped off the blood on his body. His face showed not fear, but a strong desire to fight. He had been able to withstand Tsang Lan's sword because of his strong martial body. Of course, the defense he had activated earlier had greatly weakened the impact of Tsang Lan's sword will. When the pure sword will hit his martial body, he could feel all of his meridians being destroyed in an instant, and then recovering in an instant. The excruciating pain was almost unbearable. His martial body was slightly weaker than a pinnacle paramount god, but his martial body had extremely strong regenerative abilities. Combined with the three great forbidden techniques, as long as the sword will didn't kill him directly, he could recover in an instant. Back when he had fused the three great forbidden techniques, it had been a process of destruction and creation. He could even sense that the forbidden technique runes in his body had actually shown signs of strengthening after he had endured Tsang Lan's sword intent. Tsang Lan, since you want to fight, I'll fight with you. Nye Tian stared coldly at Tsang Lan. With a low roar, the sword will surged from his body, making him look like a giant sword that stood between heaven and earth. Chapter 2009. Nye Tian stood high up in the sky, his body surging with power. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Tsang Lan's previous attack had caused serious damage to his martial constitution, but he had the earth vein source, which allowed him to recover instantly. As long as it was not a fatal injury to his Yuan meridian or primordial spirit, Nye Tian could recover quickly. This was the most terrifying part of his martial constitution. The fusion of the demonic aura with the earth vein source not only increased Nye Tian's strength, but also gave him the ability to recover instantly. Although the previous attack had injured Nye Tian, it made him realize something very strange. Tsang Lan's sword will could actually strengthen the forbidden skill rune in his body. Nye Tian didn't know why this was happening. He had fought many swordsmen before, but none of their sword intents had been able to affect his forbidden magic runes. It seemed that Song Lan's sword will was very strange and had a very terrifying power. "Nye Tian, do you really think that you are a match for me just because you barely managed to block my attack? You are too funny," Song Lan said coldly, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Song Lan was very unhappy that he had failed to kill Nye Tian with his sword strike. Now he was truly enraged. "Don't be too arrogant. Maybe you will soon find out that the one who is really funny is you." Nye Tian looked at Song Lan, the sword will in his body bloomed to the extreme, making him look like he was filled with murderous intent. "Damn it!" Song Lan let out a furious roar. Gripping his sword with both hands, he swung it down with all his might. In an instant, a torrential wave of sword intent came crashing down. Endless sharp sword chi wreaked havoc in the air and pressed down on Nye Tian. At this moment, everyone felt a terrifying pressure. This was not because of Song Lan's strength, but because the holy sword in his hand was releasing a weak saint energy that permeated the air, causing a sense of pressure to the crowd. Seeing this, Nye Tian slashed out with Starlight Sky Slash. The sword will in his body roared and turned into a mighty sword shadow. He was going to fight Song Lan head-on. He had already discovered that if he were to blindly defend, it would only put him in a more dangerous and passive position. To defeat Song Lan, Nye Tian's only chance was to fight him head-on. "Look, Nye Tian actually wants to fight with Song Lan, is he crazy?" Someone saw this scene and his eyes couldn't help but tremble as he screamed. "Nye Tian has a death wish. Even if he's an early paramount god, there's no way he can fight Sage Sword Azure Wave head-on." Obviously, Nye Tian was committing suicide. Generally speaking, it was rare for paramount gods to be able to fight people who were one minor level higher than them. To be able to fight people who were 2 minor levels higher than them was like a phoenix feather or a Qilin horn. Nye Tian was only an early godlord, and had relied on heaven-defying methods to push himself to the level of an early paramount god. Now that he was fighting Kanglin, it was a bit risky. That said, he knew that it was a risk he had to take. It was his only chance to defeat Song Lan. "Nye Tian, you want to fight me with your current sword intent? You're courting death." Seeing Nye Tian's actions, Song Lan revealed a sinister smile and laughed maniacally. Boom! Just as Song Lan's voice fell, the 2 gigantic sword shadows finally collided head-on. Suddenly, a shocking wave of sword essence appeared and spread in all directions. Nye Tian's body trembled violently, and he was forced to retreat thousands of meters. Song Lan, however, stood firmly in place like a mountain. Clearly, Nye Tian was much weaker in a head-on clash of sword intent. Regaining his balance, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his flushed complexion immediately took a turn for the better. Song Lan was strong, and it would be very difficult for Nye Tian to defeat him in a head-on fight. When Song Lan saw that Nye Tian wasn't dead, and had only suffered some minor injuries, he was even more furious. He was Song Lan, someone who could wield a holy sword, and yet he couldn't even kill someone who was far weaker than him. That was a disgrace to him. Thinking of this, the killing intent in Song Lan's eyes intensified. His aura suddenly changed, and a completely different kind of power surged out of him, causing his sword intent to skyrocket. Song Lan's aura is getting stronger. The crowd couldn't help but exclaim. Up in the sky, Gongsun Xing and the others' expressions changed again and again. The fact that Nye Tian had blocked 2 of Song Lan's swords had ignited hope in Gongsun Xing's heart. But when he saw that Song Lan's aura was still skyrocketing, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He was very curious about how strong Song Lan really was. "Nye Tian, it's not bad that you could take 2 of my swords, but it's time for this fight to end. My next sword will take your life." At this time, Song Lan's figure suddenly rose up, standing in the endless sword intent. He was like a god of sword, killing and destroying everything. Nie Tian felt the change in Song Lan's aura, and his face darkened slightly. He knew that the next sword would be even more terrifying than the previous two. With this thought in mind, Nie Tian didn't hesitate at all. Suddenly, balls of terrifying dark power surged out of his body, wrapping him up like a dark vortex. The dark power was the divine demon power. At this time, Nie Tian had to use the divine demon sword essence. The instant the power of the fiend gods was released, everyone felt their souls tremble as if they had sensed danger. They didn't know what kind of power Nie Tian was releasing at this time, and why it looked so terrifying. It's this kind of power again. Gong Sun Xing looked at Nie Tian, his eyes trembling, and he exclaimed in his heart. He didn't know that this was the divine demon power, but on the night when Nie Tian went berserk, he felt the same power. But the difference was that the dark aura on Nie Tian's body was much weaker than that night. When Nie Tian lost control, all 9,000 divine demon power had been awakened. But now, not all of them had been awakened in his body, so it was much weaker. Divine demon nascent embryo. Jiang Lai also looked at Nie Tian, his eyes trembling, and an unconcealable killing intent surged in them. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be able to use the power of the divine demon nascent embryo. Sensing this, Jiang Lai's expression changed, and he seemed to be a little worried. Song Lan also felt the unusual aura on Nie Tian's body, but his killing intent was strong, and he didn't care about anything else. He slashed down with the holy sword, and suddenly, an endless sword will bloomed. A dazzling golden sword shadow appeared in the air, like the golden light of the sun, and rushed towards Nie Tian. At the same time, Nie Tian also moved, and the starry heaven pierced the sky. The divine demon sword essence shot up into the sky, and a sword shadow with a dark aura appeared, as if a divine demon had descended, and a terrifying aura pressed down on the sky. The might of the saint's sword and the fiend god's sword intent collided, causing the entire world to seem tiny.